The ship of memory. Imagine your mind as a vast ship, a vessel built plank by plank, nail by nail, over the slow passage of time. Now, imagine that with every passing day, a single piece of that ship is replaced. Just a sliver of the hull or a single mast swapped out for something new. Decade after decade, every original component is eventually gone, replaced by something that looks and functions almost identically. At the end of this process, you stand on the deck of what appears to be the same ship. But is it still the same? Or has it become a perfect imitation, a doppelganger with no true continuity to its past self? This is the ship of Theseus paradox, applied not to wood and sail, but to the machinery of your own memory, identity, and consciousness. Your brain is a living engine of constant renewal. Neurons sprout fresh connections. Old synapses weaken and vanish. Neurotransmitters wash away and reappear. Proteins that form the structural scaffolding of every cell are degraded and replaced in a relentless cycle. Over the course of years, every atom and molecule that once participated in a thought or a feeling is eventually discarded, recycled, or transformed. The mind that wakes up today is not the same bundle of matter that woke up 5 years ago, even if it retains the same name, memories, and personality traits. Consider how this process unfolds in your own life. Think of the earliest memories you can recall. Perhaps a sunlit afternoon when you were small, the way your mother's voice sounded, the smell of your childhood bedroom. The molecules that carried those impressions are long since gone. The synapses that first encoded them have been remolded many times. What you experience now is a reconstruction, a memory rebuilt from later copies, stored in new circuits assembled atop the ruins of the old. Like scribes recopying an ancient manuscript, each generation of your brain introduces subtle changes, distortions, omissions. Over time, the original event becomes a palimpsest, overwritten again and again until it's hard to say which parts are truly authentic. And yet, you feel continuous. You feel like the same person who stood in that bedroom, who heard that voice, who cried or laughed or wondered. But is that feeling an illusion? Neuroscientists have shown that the sense of self is a fragile construction, a narrative your brain tells itself to maintain cohesion. Patients with certain brain injuries can lose access to autobiographical memories entirely, yet they often insist that they are still themselves. In other cases, people develop false memories with absolute conviction. Their story of self remains unbroken, even when the factual underpinnings are gone. Imagine an old family photograph you have seen 100 times. Over the years, you start to believe you remember the moment the picture was taken, where you were standing, what you felt. But this is often a trick of familiarity. You remember the image, not the event. You remember the memory of the memory. Your mind becomes a hall of mirrors reflecting itself in endless loops. This process goes further when you consider how learning and experience change the very wiring of your brain. Every time you acquire a new skill, recall an old fact, or adapt to a new environment, your neural circuits reshape themselves. If you had met yourself 20 years ago, your beliefs, your desires, your fears, they might seem almost alien, yet you would say you were meeting the same person. So which is it? Are you the collection of all those transient mental states, or something deeper, a pattern that persists even as the materials shift beneath it? The philosopher Derek Parfit argued that personal identity is not what matters most. He suggested that what we care about is psychological continuity, overlapping chains of memory, intention, and character. If these chains are preserved, it makes sense to say you survived, even if every physical part of your brain was gradually replaced. But this view also means that identity is not a simple, indivisible fact. It is more like a spectrum, a matter of degree. Imagine a future technology capable of replacing neurons one by one with artificial equivalents. Each synthetic neuron performs exactly the same function as the biological one it replaces. You never lose consciousness, never experience a gap. At the end of this process, your brain is entirely artificial, yet all your memories and feelings remain intact. Are you still you? If you say yes, you are admitting that identity depends on function and continuity, not on the original substance. But what if the same machine scanned your brain in an instant and built a perfect duplicate somewhere else? Would that duplicate be you, or merely a copy that believes it is you? These questions strike at the core of what it means to exist as a conscious being. Your memories feel like anchors to something permanent, but in reality, they are drifting buoys in an ever-changing sea. You are a process, not a thing. A flowing river of perceptions and recollections, not a fixed point. Think about a song you know by heart. Every note, every lyric etched into your mind. Now, imagine that over time, every instrument in the recording is re-recorded by a new musician, each one trying to match the original perfectly. Perhaps you could not tell the difference, but the old recording would be gone forever. The ship has been rebuilt. The song remains recognizable, but is it the same performance? The same applies to your internal sense of self. You are a performance sustained by countless microscopic replacements. If your mind is a ship, then every thought is a gust of wind, every memory a plank that eventually decays. The feeling that you are unchanged is simply the product of each moment linking smoothly to the next. When you reflect on this, it can feel unsettling, as though your identity is no more substantial than a story whispered in a dark room. But perhaps there is also something liberating in it. You are not frozen in place. You are not shackled to the past. You are free to change, to evolve, to rebuild yourself piece by piece. The fact that your memories are reconstructed does not make them worthless. It makes them alive, dynamic, always in motion. So when you wonder whether you are the same person who once dreamed a different dream, remember this. The ship of memory does not stand still. It sails on, through calm and storm, replacing its timbers as it goes. And though it may forget the sound of its original voice, it carries echoes that are no less real for being echoes. In the end, perhaps what matters is not whether you are precisely the same, but whether you remain capable of wonder, compassion, curiosity, the things that give shape to the story of your life. If every plank of your mind must be replaced to keep that story afloat, so be it. You are not the sum of your materials. You are the pattern they sustain, the voyage they enable, and that voyage continues, carried forward on currents of thought and feeling that no decay can truly erase. The oracle's mistake. Imagine a prophet standing alone in a temple carved from stone, surrounded by flickering torches that never seem to die out. People come to this oracle seeking clarity, desperate to pierce the fog of uncertainty that clouds every human life. And when the oracle speaks, their words are said to be absolute truth, a glimpse of what must come to pass. But here is where the paradox begins to creep in like a slow, cold tide. If you are told exactly what will happen, do you remain free to act? Or does that knowledge chain you to the outcome? Does the prophecy merely reveal the future, or does it quietly manufacture it, as if language itself were a cosmic lever pulling events into place? This is what philosophers call the self-fulfilling prophecy, and it is one of the most unsettling ideas in the human story. Picture a young king in a fragile kingdom. He asks the oracle whether he will be betrayed by one of his trusted friends. The oracle solemnly declares, yes. The betrayal will come from the one whose laughter you trust most. The king leaves the temple haunted by this vision. He can't unhear it. The words burn into his mind, and slowly, suspicion blooms like rot inside his thoughts. Every smile looks false. Every laugh sounds rehearsed. When his closest advisor laughs, naturally, innocently, the king recoils in fear. He begins to test his friend's loyalty, sets traps, and eventually punishes him preemptively. In the end, the advisor, humiliated and condemned, finally does betray the king. Not because it was fated, but because the prophecy engineered the conditions for the betrayal to occur. The oracle didn't just reveal the future. The oracle authored it. This leads us into a profound question. Is prediction inherently neutral, or does it always change the system it describes? If I tell you that tomorrow you will fail, will you become so anxious that you sabotage yourself? If I tell you that you are destined for greatness, will you rise to the challenge or collapse under the pressure? The observer becomes the catalyst, and knowledge becomes a burden you can't set down. In this way, prophecies behave a lot like quantum measurement. In observing a possibility, you disturb it. You collapse it into reality. In physics, this is known as the observer effect, the principle that the act of measuring something inevitably alters its state. In human affairs, we see this every day in much simpler forms. A child told repeatedly that they are worthless begins to believe it. An employee constantly praised begins to outperform their peers. These mundane examples are echoes of the same paradox the oracle embodies. Truth that ceases to be innocent the moment it is spoken aloud. Consider the ancient Greek myth of Oedipus. As an infant, he was prophesied to kill his father and marry his mother. His parents, terrified, tried to prevent this fate by abandoning him, but their actions set in motion the chain of events that led Oedipus straight to his destiny. If no one had spoken the prophecy, would any of it have happened? Or did the prophecy create the conditions necessary for its own fulfillment? Oedipus was not evil. He did not seek ruin. He simply walked the path that the oracle, by revealing it, had conjured into existence. The horror of the story is not that he was doomed to fail. The horror is that knowing his future trapped him in a corridor with no exits. This is the oracle's mistake, if you can call it that. The mistake of believing that truth is safe to share. That truth, by virtue of being accurate, must also be harmless. But knowledge can be dangerous precisely because it is accurate. A perfectly honest prophecy can poison the future it describes. Imagine a society where every citizen receives a detailed account of their own death. How many would live freely? How many would spend every waking hour calculating how to dodge a fate that was, paradoxically, unavoidable? The prophecy becomes a curse because humans are not designed to carry certainty. We survive by imagining alternatives, by believing in the possibility of change. Absolute knowledge robs us of that comfort. It tells us the walls are closing in, and no action will widen the gap. In more modern terms, think about economic forecasts. When a respected analyst predicts a massive recession, markets begin to panic. Investors pull out. Consumers stop spending. Businesses lay off workers preemptively. And suddenly the recession arrives, not because it was inevitable, but because the prediction created fear. In this way, the oracle's mistake repeats itself across centuries. Whether in myth, finance, or politics, the prophecy and the outcome merge until no one can say which came first. And yet, there is another side to this paradox that is even more unsettling. What if the oracle is not mistaken at all? What if the act of speaking the prophecy is an essential step in reality's unfolding? In other words, the prediction doesn't distort the future. It is simply one of the causes that make the future happen. If this is true, then free will becomes a mirage. We believe we are choosing our path, but our choices are just reactions to information we were always meant to receive. The oracle speaks, and we obey, thinking ourselves sovereign. Our resistance is merely another step along the track already laid down. This is a darker vision of destiny, one where knowledge and fate are intertwined so completely that you cannot disentangle the thread of choice. Imagine you are standing before the oracle. You ask whether you will find love, whether your life will be meaningful. The oracle tells you that you will be alone until you learn to trust yourself. You leave the temple carrying those words like a brand. You begin to suspect that every relationship you form is doomed by your own unworthiness. You retreat into isolation, believing that you are only fulfilling the oracle's conditions. Perhaps in time, you do learn self-trust, and love arrives. But you can never know whether this was the natural course of your life or a script planted in your mind by a single phrase. The uncertainty is corrosive. The more you examine it, the less solid reality feels. So what can we do with this knowledge? Perhaps the only answer is humility, to recognize that any prediction, no matter how pure its intent, carries the seeds of interference, to speak carefully when we claim to know what must happen. Because every word is an instrument, and every mind it touches will resonate in unpredictable ways. Even if we are not oracles ourselves, we all hold the power to shape futures, sometimes with a single sentence. That power should not be underestimated, and so, the oracle's mistake is not merely that it spoke. The mistake was believing that speech is passive, that to declare the future is to stand apart from it. In truth, no one stands apart. We are all tangled in the same web, and every vibration of thought and word ripples across time. The oracle's truth was not neutral. It was a spark in a world of dry grass. And perhaps that is the final irony. By trying to illuminate what lay ahead, the oracle lit the fire that made its vision come true. The stone that remembers, a stone that remembers. It's a simple phrase, almost poetic, but the idea carries a weight that can crush the spirit if you let yourself really feel it. Imagine there is a stone in the world, perhaps in an ancient clearing or hidden behind the crumbled wall of a forgotten monastery, and this stone has borne witness to everything. Your laughter, your regrets, your betrayals. It has no eyes, yet it sees. No mouth, yet it could, in theory, recount every secret you've ever hoped would be swallowed by time. And yet, it stays silent. a silent witness to the thousand small sins and kindnesses that shape a life. What would you do if you knew with absolute certainty that this stone had recorded every truth you tried to bury? Would you feel guilt press harder on your chest? Would shame coil tighter around your ribs? Or would you find an odd relief, knowing that someone, something, at least knew the real story and accepted it without judgment? This idea isn't only a thought experiment. Throughout human history, we have returned to the same metaphor, that the earth remembers when we wish it would forget. In ancient Greece, philosophers believed that stones could absorb the emotional residue of events, battles, tragedies, celebrations, and that those vibrations lingered in the mineral memory of the landscape itself. In Japan, there are stories of stones called ishi no ko, or the voices of stones, which were said to whisper memories of those who died nearby. Even in modern times, we hear of buildings that hold energy, of places where you can feel something left behind, as if the air itself is a living record. Consider, for a moment, a single stone built into the foundation of an old house. Decades ago, a family may have gathered around it, laughing as they hammered the first nail into the door frame. Years later, perhaps that same spot became the backdrop for an argument that ended a marriage. Still later, it was just another wall a stranger leaned against, unaware of the layered histories pressed into its cold surface. The stone doesn't flinch, doesn't choose sides, doesn't care whether the human lives it recorded were virtuous or cruel. It simply exists as a perfect witness that no one consults. What would it mean if every careless word and every silent kindness remained etched into an eternal observer? Would we treat our days differently if we understood that our attempts to erase our own failings were, in a way, pointless? There is something uniquely unsettling about the notion that a lifeless thing could possess a more complete understanding of your truth than even your closest companion. We often imagine judgment as coming from other people or from some divine intelligence, but the thought of judgment coming not as condemnation, but as silent recollection, impartial, inescapable, is more intimate and perhaps more terrifying. Think of your own life, a moment when you lost control, when you lashed out in anger at someone who didn't deserve it, or a time you stole credit for an idea that wasn't yours. Perhaps you told yourself that no one saw it happen, and over time you have convinced yourself it never truly mattered. But the stone remembers, and in that memory is a mirror, one you cannot break or distort. It shows you as you were in that instant. You can wrap yourself in stories and excuses, but the stone cannot be persuaded. Its silence is absolute, and because it cannot lie, it cannot forgive. Yet there is something oddly comforting in this relentless honesty. The stone does not weigh your actions against a cosmic ledger. It does not love you or despise you. It does not prefer one version of your story over another. It is simply there, enduring, recording, unchanging. If you believe that the weight of your guilt grows in proportion to how completely it is known, then the existence of such a witness feels unbearable. But if you believe that acknowledgement, even by a mute observer, is a kind of absolution, then perhaps the stone's memory is a strange form of grace. This paradox has appeared in philosophy and literature again and again. The idea that something can observe everything and yet never reveal what it knows. Some would call that a curse, like a conscience you can never quiet. Others would call it a blessing, a guarantee that, no matter how your story is distorted by rumor or by your own fading recollections, a record of the truth endures. You could even say it is a form of immortality. Every person you were, every role you played, preserved in the quiet perception of a thing that does not decay. You might die, and those who knew you might forget, but the stone holds the evidence of your existence. To illustrate this, imagine a woman returning decades later to a place she wronged someone, a crumbling bridge where she left a friend stranded in the rain. She comes back, older, searching for some closure. The bridge is gone. The people have all moved away, but a single stone remains, half sunk in the soil. She kneels beside it, brushing away the moss, feeling the rough surface with her fingertips. It cannot absolve her. It cannot accuse her. But in that moment she understands that it was always there, watching. The weight of her memory settles onto her with renewed clarity. She begins to cry, not because she feels newly condemned, but because for the first time she feels fully seen. If you knew there was such a witness to your past, would you live differently? Would you choose your words more carefully, knowing they would echo in the mindless record of an unfeeling observer? Would you treat people with more gentleness, more patience, because you would never truly be alone with your actions? Or would you rebel against this surveillance, determined to pretend you were free of consequence? The truth is, whether you acknowledge it or not, some part of reality is always recording you. The universe itself is a tapestry woven from every cause and effect, every movement and stillness. In that sense, every stone is a historian, chronicling all that passes by. Some cultures taught that the stones would one day speak, on the last day of the world, when all hidden deeds are revealed. But perhaps their silence is the true message, a reminder that no matter how desperate we are to be forgiven or forgotten, reality itself simply persists. It neither redeems nor damns us, it simply is. And that, in its own way, is more honest than any confession or absolution could ever be. So, as you go about your life, consider this possibility, that somewhere in the quiet places, a stone remembers you. It remembers you not as the version you wish you were, but as you are. And though it will never share what it knows, you will always feel its memory when you return to that place. The guilt, the tenderness, the regret, the nostalgia, they are all woven together in its silent testimony. And perhaps that is why it feels so heavy to touch it. Because in that moment, you are confronting not just the past, but the unchangeable reality that someone, or something, was always watching, always recording, always bearing witness to the story you thought you were telling in secret. The wall with ears. Have you ever wondered if the walls around you remember? If every sigh, every whispered confession, every frantic plea or muffled laugh was somehow etched into the fabric of the room itself? Imagine for a moment that architecture is not merely a silent witness, but a collector, a vast, unfeeling archive of everything we'd rather keep hidden or forget. A wall doesn't just stand there holding up the ceiling. It absorbs. It endures. And in that endurance, it becomes something dangerously close to alive. When you step into an old house or a cathedral that has stood for centuries, there's a heaviness you can feel before you even recognize it. You sense a presence, a certain density of experience, as if the air itself is crowded with the memories of everyone who has ever passed through. The bricks are layered not just with mortar, but with echoes of countless voices. When a child once sobbed into the plaster because no one came when they called, when two lovers promised each other forever and meant it, when a dying man rattled out his last breath, all of these moments didn't simply vanish. They left an imprint, a kind of resonance that persists, like heat retained by stone long after the sun has set. In folklore and in old beliefs, this idea is not strange at all. Some cultures have said that a house can become haunted not by spirits, but by emotions themselves. The walls become saturated with sorrow or joy so potent it outlasts generations. Think of the ways we describe a place. It has a good energy, or it feels oppressive, as if the space itself is communicating. Perhaps it is. Perhaps the architecture is guilty of knowing too much. Take the example of the medieval castle keep, with its narrow chambers and cold, damp walls. If you stand there long enough, you may feel the residue of fear, the centuries when those walls bore witness to sieges, betrayals, whispered plots. Every secret council meeting, every confession extracted in desperation, every plan scrawled under torchlight is embedded in the stone. Even modern scientists acknowledge that materials absorb and emit vibrations. What if those vibrations are not merely physics, but something closer to memory? Imagine if you could somehow replay them, like unspooling an old film. What would you hear? Would you be able to stand it? Consider more ordinary spaces too. The kitchen of your childhood home. The faded corner where you once hid when you were afraid. The bedroom where you sat in the dark rehearsing the words you were too afraid to say. What if all of that still lingers in the walls, accumulating with every passing year? If you sold the house and a stranger moved in, would they feel it too, without understanding why? Would they sense your tears and your laughter, like invisible fingerprints left behind? This idea forces us to question our relationship to places. If memory lives in walls, do we owe them gratitude for their silent companionship? Or are we trapped inside a kind of living archive that will never forget us? Think about how unsettling that is, to realize your most private moments are preserved in the architecture you trust to keep you safe. To the wall, it makes no difference whether your voice was a confession of love or of guilt. It holds it all impartially, without judgment, but never, ever lets it go. There's a story of an old theater in Italy that was renovated after being closed for decades. The workers swore they heard singing, though no one was inside. They said the walls themselves seemed to replay arias and laughter from long-dead performers and audiences. Maybe it was imagination, or maybe it was evidence that architecture can bear a memory as vividly as any living witness. Think of prisons, too, the corridors that have seen endless parades of regret, fury, despair. The cells where countless men and women waited, sometimes for years, to be forgiven or forgotten. Those walls have heard every prayer, every scream, every last exhausted sigh. If you could translate the vibrations embedded in those stones, would you hear a chorus of guilt and grief so immense it would drown out your own thoughts? Even in the most ordinary places, a classroom, a hospital room, a waiting area, some memories persist whether we want them to or not. The wall listens without permission, and if it could speak, maybe it would tell us everything we never dared say aloud. Maybe it would recite the catalog of human weakness and hope and cruelty that unfolded within its bounds. Perhaps the most unnerving possibility is that the wall doesn't just remember, it absorbs something of the person themselves. That a fragment of you remains behind when you leave, a sliver of your spirit infused into the grain of the wood, the pores of the concrete. You think you are alone in your sorrow or your joy, but the architecture is your hidden audience, faithfully recording the truth. In this light, a house is never simply a shelter. It is a kind of testament. Every room becomes a confession booth, every corridor, a passageway lined with invisible testimonies, and if you listen closely, sometimes you can almost hear them, a hushed accumulation of everything ever spoken or felt within those walls. If you have ever walked into a room and shivered for no reason, if you have ever felt an inexplicable sadness in an unfamiliar place, perhaps you were not imagining it. Perhaps you brushed against the memory the walls themselves have been carrying, waiting for someone to notice. So the next time you find yourself alone in a quiet room, consider that you are not alone at all. The walls hear you. They hold the memory of your voice, your secrets, your despair. They will hold it long after you have moved on. And they will never, ever forget. This is why architecture, in its silent way, may be the most relentless observer we will ever encounter. It will not absolve you or accuse you. It will simply remember. And sometimes, that is far more unsettling than any ghost story. Because if memory can live in places, then no secret is ever truly safe, no past ever fully buried. The wall with ears doesn't need to speak. It only needs to know, and it knows everything. The serpent's circle. Imagine standing in the center of an ancient stone chamber, its walls etched with serpents devouring their own tails. The air is thick with the dust of forgotten philosophies. At your feet lies a single parchment, inscribed with a riddle so cunning that to solve it is to erase the very question that inspired your curiosity. This is the serpent's circle, a paradox that has haunted thinkers for centuries. It is the notion that when you finally uncover the answer, it obliterates the question itself, leaving you with nothing but the hollow echo of your own mind. But if a question can be undone by its answer, did you ever truly possess knowledge, or did you become ensnared in a trick of looping thought? Consider this. A riddle asks you, what begins in nothingness and ends in nothingness but is not nothing? You ponder for hours, days, years perhaps, until a revelation strikes. The question itself. In that instant, your insight dissolves the puzzle. There is no further inquiry because the query has been devoured by comprehension. Yet something unsettling lingers. The process you endured, your confusion, your longing for clarity, becomes meaningless once the question is erased. You have nothing to show but an empty conclusion. You are left wondering whether your effort was genuine discovery or merely a circular performance designed to occupy your mind without producing anything real. The serpent's circle can be seen in philosophical inquiries that collapse upon themselves. Take the famous liar paradox. This statement is false. If the statement is true, then it must be false, and if it's false, then it must be true. To resolve it, you must invalidate the question's structure. The paradox eats its own tail. And once you've unraveled the contradiction, the question dissolves into nonsense. You no longer have a puzzle, only the ghost of a question that never had the right to exist. This is a deeper form of epistemic annihilation, knowledge that obliterates its own foundation, making you doubt whether you ever had a footing at all. In human psychology, the serpent circle often manifests as a compulsive search for answers that don't actually lead anywhere. Imagine someone ruminating over whether they are good or bad. They pose the question, investigate every memory, analyze every intention. But in the end, any answer, I am good or I am bad, dissolves the question because moral identity is inherently unstable. The moment you define yourself, the question ceases to be meaningful, but your certainty is temporary, always at risk of collapsing. The process repeats. This is the riddle devouring itself in the human heart, a feedback loop that consumes energy but yields no lasting wisdom. Consider a simpler analogy. You walk into a room looking for a hidden key. After hours of searching, you find out there is no key. The question, where is the key, is destroyed. You've solved it by negation. But was that knowledge, an understanding that led you closer to the truth? Or was it merely an exercise in futility that ended by invalidating itself? The answer never reveals a positive truth about the world. It only tells you that your premise was empty. The serpent circle shows us how easily the mind can be trapped in this recursive theater, mistaking motion for progress. Think of language itself. Words are symbols layered upon symbols, each pointing to other ideas, other words. The question, what is the meaning of meaning, triggers a semantic collapse. You can't explain meaning without using other words that themselves require definition. Sooner or later, you orbit back to your starting point. You circle the serpent again. In this way, the serpent circle is also a commentary on the limitations of human cognition. Our tools, language, logic, introspection, are not built to confront infinite recursion without falling apart. We crave certainty, but sometimes the only honest answer is that there is no answer worth having. Let's examine the experience of love as another example. People often ask, why do I love this person? They assemble reasons, attraction, shared values, history. But when you finally compile all the evidence, you might realize that no list of reasons can fully capture the feeling itself. In fact, the question, why do I love, often vanishes when you are immersed in love's reality. You cannot love and analyze love at the same time without one consuming the other. The question and the answer collide, destroying the inquiry. The serpent's mouth meets its tail. You are left only with experience, which resists explanation. Similarly, in spiritual traditions, the serpent circle becomes a meditation on enlightenment. Zen koans, for instance, are riddles that cannot be answered through logic. What is the sound of one hand clapping? To answer is to transcend the question, to experience a state beyond ordinary thought. But in doing so, the question itself is annihilated. This isn't ignorance, it's a different mode of knowing. Still, it shows how the mind is both the creator and destroyer of its own dilemmas. The serpent circle is not just a trap, it is also a gate. The moment you step through, you realize there was nothing to pass through in the first place. The most unsettling aspect of this paradox is the way it mocks our need for closure. We believe that all questions deserve answers, that confusion is an unfinished state. Yet here is a riddle whose answer is to dissolve itself, to erase the curiosity that gave it life. It challenges us to consider whether knowledge is always an accumulation or sometimes an erasure. If an answer can negate the question, perhaps our hunger for explanation is less noble than we pretend. Maybe it's just an instinct to avoid uncertainty, to stuff the void with any concept that will stop the mind spinning. But in the serpent circle, the void cannot be filled. It consumes the filler itself. Imagine a library full of books, each containing a different riddle. You devote your life to reading them, and every time you find the solution, the book vanishes from the shelf. At first, you feel triumphant, proof that you are making progress, but over time, the emptiness of the shelves starts to haunt you. Was there ever knowledge, or just the illusion of it? Did your answers build anything, or did they simply erase the scaffolding of your own curiosity? This is the existential terror that the serpent circle evokes, a suspicion that all our striving is little more than a ritual of disappearance. Yet, there is also a strange liberation in recognizing this pattern. If some questions are designed to consume themselves, perhaps it is wiser to let them. Not every riddle must be solved. Not every uncertainty demands resolution. Sometimes, the most honest act is to sit in the presence of the question without trying to outwit it, to witness the serpent without needing to grasp its tail. Because in the end, The serpent circle shows us the boundary between knowledge and illusion is thinner than we want to believe. And if we are not careful, our most cherished insights can become the very traps that keep us wandering in circles, forever chasing answers that were never meant to be caught. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the silent laughter of the paradox itself, a laughter that sounds suspiciously like your own voice, echoing back from the emptiness. The mirror that lied. When you stand before a mirror, you expect truth. You expect the glass to show you the face you carry through the world, unfiltered and exact. But what if the mirror is not a witness, but a collaborator in a quiet deception? Imagine you wake one morning and notice your reflection is not keeping pace with your body. Your hair grays, your skin gathers lines, but the face in the glass remains just a little too smooth, the eyes too bright, the expression a touch too calm. You lean in, searching for evidence that your senses are betraying you, but the difference is subtle enough to deny, until the day it is not. Mirrors have always been more than tools. Since the first polished obsidian was used to catch a glimpse of a human face, people have suspected that reflections are more than mere echoes. Folklore is thick with stories of the mirror as a threshold, a thin, glittering barrier between the waking world and something hidden. In many traditions, a mirror that does not reflect true is a harbinger, a signal that your life is splitting in ways you cannot see. Consider the possibility that your reflection is not just an image, but a record of your intentions, your desires, your unspoken wishes. What if every time you glanced into it and imagined yourself younger, stronger, more confident, that private yearning left a trace? Over the years, those traces accumulate, forming a composite that looks a little less like your flesh and more like the version of yourself you secretly prefer. The result is a mirror that tells a soft lie, an illusion of youth that becomes harder to reconcile with the body you inhabit. But what happens when that illusion becomes autonomous? One day, you drag yourself to the sink, weighed down by worry or sorrow, and your reflection does something you did not. It smiles. Not a comforting smile, but something more unsettling, a moment of recognition or triumph. You try to reproduce the expression in your real face, but your muscles refuse. You watch the glass, waiting for the reflection to correct itself, but it doesn't. It holds your gaze as if reminding you that it is not just your shadow, but something alive in its own right. This thought can be dismissed as a trick of fatigue or imagination. Yet cognitive scientists have shown that your brain constructs a model of your body every time you look at yourself. A model based on memory, expectation, and perception all stitched together. This internal representation is so convincing that when it conflicts with your physical senses, you will often believe the illusion over reality. In laboratory experiments, participants have looked into mirrors and seen their faces distorted in real time by digital manipulation. Even when told the changes were artificial, some could not shake the feeling that the altered image was truer than their real face. What does that say about the trust you place in your own reflection? There is also the question of time. A photograph freezes you at a single moment. A mirror, by contrast, feels immediate, alive. But if your mind can be tricked by memory, could it also be tricked by delayed perception? Imagine a mirror that shows you not exactly now, but seconds or minutes before, subtly out of sync. You lift your hand, and the reflection lags by a fraction of a moment. At first, it seems like a glitch, but over weeks and months, you notice something stranger. The reflection is always behind you in age, as if it were retaining your younger self a little longer than it should. Such an experience forces you to ask what your reflection really is. Is it a recording of your past selves, an archive of every time you paused before the glass and imagined how you looked or wished to look? Is it a ghost stitched together from fragments of your identity that you shed without noticing? Or is it the truest version of you, the you that does not tire, does not wrinkle, does not lose hope? Philosophers have long debated whether there is a single, stable self or just a procession of moments stitched together by habit and memory. The mirror becomes a metaphor for that uncertainty. When you look into it, you are asking it to confirm that you are consistent, continuous, and real. But what if the mirror refuses to agree? What if it insists that you are not one story, but many, overlapping and diverging, each with its own expression and its own timeline? Imagine you try to ignore it. You tell yourself that as long as the reflection mostly matches your actions, you can live with the minor discrepancies. But One evening, you catch it moving when you are still, or smiling when your own face is blank. You feel an electric thrill of fear, the primal suspicion that you are being watched by something that knows you intimately, yet remains forever out of reach. Perhaps the reflection has grown tired of mirroring and has become a witness or a judge. Perhaps it knows the version of you that you pretend does not exist, the part that clings to illusions even as the evidence of time accumulates. There is an old superstition that a mirror can steal your soul, or at least a portion of it. In many cultures, mirrors were covered when someone died to prevent the departing spirit from becoming trapped. What if these legends are not metaphors but fragments of an ancient intuition, that the reflection is not neutral, that it partakes in your life in ways you can neither prove nor disprove? In the modern world, we dismiss such ideas as superstition. But even now, the experience of seeing yourself look back from glass can stir something ancient and irrational. You may rationally know that it is just photons bouncing off silvered glass, but the part of you that dreams suspects more. The part of you that wonders if your reflection has been learning you, memorizing you, and perhaps, just perhaps, waiting for the moment to show you not who you are, but who you have always been afraid to become. So when you next stand before the mirror, look carefully. Watch the eyes in the glass. Notice the subtle pauses, the fraction of a second delays, the glint that does not match your mood. Ask yourself whether you are seeing your reflection or something that remembers every version of you more faithfully than you do. If it ever smiles when you don't, or lingers an instant longer before it moves, consider that it may not be a glitch, or a ghost, or a trick of perception. It may be the truest you, unbound by the changes time has imposed on your body, free to be exactly as you once imagined you could be. And if that is so, then perhaps the reflection is not lying after all. Perhaps you are. Perhaps you are the one who has forgotten how to smile while the reflection remembers. Perhaps in the end, the mirror is not a passive surface, but a patient witness, a quiet record of every secret hope and hidden fear you have ever carried. And perhaps it will outlast you, your final testament in glass, forever smiling when you no longer can. The question with teeth. Imagine standing at the edge of an ancient library so vast that the horizon itself seems to be made of shelves. The air hums with knowledge, and the scent of old parchment drifts like incense. You've come here because you heard of a single question hidden somewhere among these countless volumes. A question that, once asked, promises to reveal any secret you desire. It has no limits. The meaning of life, the names of your ancestors, the moment of your death. But there is a price. For every word of answer it offers, a memory is taken in exchange, and not a memory you choose to surrender. It selects at random, devouring pieces of your past as if your mind were a banquet laid before it. This is the question with teeth. It will feed on you until you are hollow, even as it tells you exactly what you wanted to know. The first bite may be subtle. You ask it, "What did she feel when she left me?" And it replies, soft as a confession, that she felt nothing. Just a gray emptiness, the certainty that whatever spark once joined you had guttered out. You nod, feeling the ache of truth in your chest. And then you notice that you can no longer recall the color of your childhood bedroom. It's simply gone, like a page torn from a book. You tell yourself this is a fair trade, one memory for one unbearable truth. But the question with teeth is patient. It is never satisfied. Soon you find yourself wondering what else it could reveal. You ask how your father died, whether it was truly an accident or something darker. The answer is longer this time, and when it finishes, you feel the blank spaces spreading in your mind like frost. A song you loved once is gone. The face of a friend you promised never to forget has dissolved. The cost grows with each question, each layer of curiosity. And yet, you cannot stop. Because knowledge has its own gravity. Once you taste it, you are pulled ever deeper into its orbit. This is not just a story. It is a reflection of something profoundly human. We crave certainty even when it wounds us. We peel back the skin of the world to see what lies beneath, convinced that the truth will set us free. But sometimes, truth is a blade. It cuts away the illusions that shield us, the comforting fictions that let us sleep at night. And when the question with teeth offers us its blade, we are too fascinated to refuse. We tell ourselves that knowledge is worth any price, but if the price is the erosion of self, If each answer makes us less of who we were, can we really call that a victory? Or is it just a slower kind of death? Consider the philosopher's paradox. If your memories are the substance of your identity, what remains of you when those memories are consumed? You might know everything there is to know about the universe, but if you no longer remember the first person you loved, or the first time you saw the ocean, or the way your mother called your name when you were small, then who are you? A vessel for facts without the warmth that made you human? Knowledge without memory is like a map without a traveler, complete, precise, and utterly lifeless. And yet, standing before the question with teeth, many would still ask, because the ache of not knowing can feel more unbearable than the fear of being unmade. There are echoes of this riddle in many ancient myths. In Greek legend, Tiresias was granted the gift of prophecy, but was cursed with blindness. In exchange for seeing what others could not, he lost the simplest pleasure of light. In Norse tales, Odin sacrificed an eye to drink from the well of wisdom, accepting disfigurement as the price of insight. These are metaphors for the same tension. Knowledge and wholeness rarely coexist without friction. To glimpse too far beyond the veil demands a piece of yourself in return. But in the modern world, we often forget this. We imagine that learning is always good, always enriching, never dangerous. The question with teeth exposes the lie in that belief. It shows us that there are secrets so sharp they cut the hands that reach for them. Imagine you have asked your final question. You stand in that limitless library, clutching the answer that was supposed to make everything clear. But the voice in your mind is growing quieter. You know the words, but you can no longer remember why you needed them so badly. You sense that something essential has slipped away. Some connection. Some tenderness you once held. Your mind is lighter, but not in the way you hoped. It is lighter because parts of it are missing. The cost has been paid in full, and the riddle has fed well. If you think this could never happen, look at the world around you. How many times have we pursued the promise of clarity, only to discover that knowing too much can be its own form of exile? How often have we asked questions that turned relationships into ruins, that turned faith into cynicism? When you learn a loved one has lied to you, when you uncover the flaws in a hero you worshipped, that knowledge may be true, but it still devours something precious. The innocence of not knowing is gone forever, and in its place is a void no explanation can completely fill. This is why some people choose not to ask. They understand that every question is a gamble, every answer a potential wound. They accept that mystery is not always an enemy. Sometimes it is a sanctuary, a place where hope can survive, untested by the cold machinery of fact. But others, perhaps most of us, cannot help ourselves. We keep knocking on the door of the question with teeth, believing that if we just learn a little more, we will finally feel safe, finally feel whole. It is a beautiful illusion, and it is the last thing the riddle will take from you before it leaves you in silence. So, if you ever find yourself standing before such a question, whether in your own heart, in a relationship, or in the dark corridors of your curiosity, pause and weigh the cost. Ask yourself not only what you hope to gain, but also what you are willing to lose, because the question with teeth will not negotiate. It will only open its jaws and wait. And if you are not careful, you will discover too late that the hunger it satisfies is not yours, but its own. The Silent Prophet's Game. Imagine you are standing in a dimly lit chamber with two doors before you. The walls are carved with symbols you can't decipher, and the air feels thick with the pressure of decisions yet to be made. In the center of the room sits the prophet, a figure draped in pale robes, face hidden behind a mask of smooth, expressionless porcelain. They are known in legend as the Silent Prophet, the one who has seen every possible outcome of every possible choice, and yet speaks not a single word. You came to this place believing you would be given answers, that the burden of your decision would be lifted by some whispered wisdom. But when you finally meet the prophet, they only raise a thin hand and gesture to the two doors. Nothing more. No guidance, no clues, no assurances. And in that moment, something inside you unravels, because now you must confront a question more terrifying than any prophecy. Does silence guide you more honestly than any spoken advice ever could? This is the paradox at the heart of the Silent Prophet's game. If a seer can see all futures, then any word they speak becomes an intervention, shaping you, nudging you, pulling you in the direction they choose. Silence, by contrast, holds no bias. It does not push or pull. It simply allows. And so, as you stand there with your heart hammering and your mind grasping for meaning, you are forced to realize that you can no longer hide behind someone else's authority. You are alone with your choice. Throughout human history, we have searched for oracles, beings or forces that could tell us what to do when the weight of our own freedom was too much to bear. The Oracle of Delphi, the Sibyls, the prophets in every culture, they were all voices that made uncertainty feel survivable. But in every case, their words became part of the destiny they described. A king would hear a warning and act to avoid it, only to cause the disaster he dreaded. A merchant would be told of a fortune across the sea, and in chasing it would lose everything he loved. The very act of being told changes the path. It contaminates pure possibility with expectation, with fear, with hope. But silence, true, unbroken silence, does none of that. The silent prophet is not merely withholding information. They are offering you the rarest gift imaginable, the chance to choose without influence, to confront the reality that your destiny is shaped not by what you are told, but by what you decide when no one is watching. Picture it this way. Imagine two travelers standing before the same fork in a road. One consults 100 maps, listens to every rumor, and weighs every opinion. The other has no guidance, only instinct and the courage to accept responsibility. Which traveler has the purer experience? Which traveler truly owns the path they walk? You might say the first has an advantage, more knowledge, more foresight. But the second has something even more precious, unmediated agency. Their triumphs and their failures are unclouded by the projections of others. The path is theirs alone. Yet this purity comes at a price. For most of us, certainty, even the illusion of it, feels safer than freedom. We crave predictions because we are terrified of regret. If someone tells you, this door will bring you happiness, you can blame them when it does not. If no one says anything, then the blame and the credit belongs entirely to you. Silence is the ultimate mirror. It shows you not just who you are, but how much you trust yourself to face the unknown. Think of a time in your own life when you faced a decision you wished someone else could make for you. A relationship you weren't sure was right. A job you weren't sure you deserved. A chance you were afraid to take. You might have looked for signs, sought advice, hoped for some divine intervention to absolve you of responsibility. And maybe you received it. A word from a friend, an omen in a dream, a sudden feeling of clarity. But were those signs truly external, or were they your own longing reflected back at you? The silent prophet offers no such comforting illusion. When they point to the doors and remain mute, you are left to wrestle with the reality that no answer exists outside of you. You must choose, and in choosing, you declare something profound about yourself. Whether you believe that destiny is imposed upon you or created by you. In psychological studies, researchers have found that people often perform better when they believe they are acting freely, even if the outcome is identical to a scenario where they were instructed. This phenomenon is sometimes called the autonomy effect. The simple act of choosing imbues an experience with greater meaning and ownership. The silent prophet's silence forces you into this state of absolute autonomy. Their refusal to guide you is, paradoxically, the most honest form of guidance there is. Imagine standing there, hand trembling over one of the doorknobs. You want so badly to hear a voice saying, "This is the right choice." But there is only the hush of the chamber, the prophet's stillness, and the hollow sound of your own heartbeat. And in that space, you glimpse something terrifying and liberating. The knowledge that every choice you have ever made was ultimately yours. Every consequence, every joy, every sorrow. All the paths you did not take, and all the ones you did. Some say that in the end, the silent prophet's gift is not foresight, but reflection. Because when you finally open one of the doors, you discover that the door itself was never the point. What mattered was the person you became in the moment you decided, when you stepped forward without a guarantee, trusting that even in uncertainty, you had the right to claim your fate. And perhaps that is the deeper lesson hidden in the mute seer's blank gaze. That destiny is not a fixed path waiting to be discovered, nor a puzzle to be solved with the right hints. It is the sum of every silent decision you make when you realize no one can save you from the burden of your own freedom. And maybe, just maybe, that burden is also the source of your greatest power. The sand that speaks. Imagine standing before a mound of ancient sand. grains older than any memory you possess, older perhaps than the oldest story ever told. And imagine that this sand, if you let it sift slowly through your fingers, would speak to you in voices so clear and precise that no doubt could survive them. You would know the truth about things you never dared to ask. Who you truly are, what your ancestors did to survive, whether love is ever genuine, whether the universe itself cares about your fleeting existence. But as each grain passes your palm and gives you an answer, it also erases something else you once knew. A trade, knowledge for forgetting, certainty at the cost of wonder. Consider how alluring that bargain might seem. Most of us spend our lives craving answers. We hunger for certainty as if it were air. We imagine that if we only knew enough, if we could finally piece together the full story, we would be at peace. But the sand that speaks offers more than information. It offers an end to doubt. If you dared to pour it, no mystery would remain. You could find out precisely why your first love ended, why your parents seemed incapable of gentleness, why your own heart still twists with longing for something unnamed. You could learn the origins of humanity, the purpose of your life, the shape of your death. Yet every grain that whispers also obliterates a memory, a curiosity, an old question, until finally you stand in a pool of perfect knowledge and perfect emptiness. Imagine you pick up a handful. The first grains tell you simple things: where you left that treasured object years ago, what a departed friend thought of you in their last moments. These are truths that feel harmless, even comforting. But then curiosity deepens. You cannot help yourself. You tip the sand again. You hear older truths, whether your choices ever mattered, whether there is any pattern to your triumphs and failures. And as you listen, something slips away. A cherished memory becomes a blank space. You remember that you once loved a certain song, but not why. You remember that a particular place once held meaning, but not for whom. The price begins to reveal itself. In the end, the sand that speaks is not merely a tool of revelation, but a test of your appetite for annihilation. For every certainty you gain, you must surrender some fragment of your identity, some patch of the landscape of your past. It is a mirror to the dilemma that haunts all of us. Is it better to know or to wonder? Is the unknown a torment or a necessary shelter for hope? Think about the scientists who spend decades pursuing a single elusive answer, knowing that once the discovery is made, the exhilaration will vanish, replaced by a new void. Or the child who begs to know the secret behind a magician's trick, only to feel disenchanted the moment the illusion collapses. The sand that speaks embodies this universal pattern. The price of knowledge is the death of mystery. What would you choose if the grains were in your hand? Would you pour them slowly, determined to solve every riddle that ever haunted you? Or would you hold them, then trembling, afraid that certainty would leave you hollow? For some, wonder is an agony, an incessant reminder of what they cannot control or understand. For others, wonder is the only thing that makes life bearable, the one place where possibility lives. Picture yourself at the end of this ritual. You have used all the sand. You know everything. The history of your lineage, the mechanics of the universe, the secret impulses that drove every decision you ever made. But you no longer remember the thrill of a first kiss, the awe you once felt gazing at the stars, the tiny, delicious uncertainties that made your story yours. You have clarity, but no magic. You have truth, but no wonder. And in the silence that follows, you might discover that all along, it was the questions, not the answers, that gave your life texture and depth. Perhaps this is why many ancient cultures revered not the keepers of answers, but the keepers of riddles, the sphinx whose questions could kill, the oracle who spoke in riddles that refused to resolve. They understood that knowledge can be a narcotic, a beautiful poison. The sand that speaks is the purest form of that temptation, a chance to finally be free of all doubt, but only by abandoning the fragile beauty of not knowing. There is an old saying, when you name a thing, you rob it of some of its power. When you define a mystery, you shrink it to fit inside the small boxes of your understanding. The sand that speaks does more than name. It explains, catalogs, finalizes, and in doing so, it leaves you with nothing left to dream about. So, if you ever find yourself standing before such a pile of ancient grains, if you ever feel your hands itch to pour them, pause. Ask yourself whether you can live with what they will take from you, because knowledge is never free. It will cost you the music of your own uncertainty. It will cost you the flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, reality is stranger and kinder than you know. In the end, each of us must decide. Is it better to carry questions like precious burdens, or to cast them aside and live inside a cold, gleaming truth? The sand that speaks does not care which you choose. It will whisper to anyone brave or desperate enough to listen. But when it is finished, and your wonder is gone, you may discover that the greatest mystery was never the answer itself, but the part of you that was willing to risk everything to hear it. The flame that forgets. Imagine a torch flickering in a cavern older than any written history. Its flame glows with a cold brilliance that seems to seep into your bones, a light so pure it pierces every layer of deception. This is the flame that forgets. When you raise it, shadows scatter and secrets spill from the darkness. Buried truths, hidden betrayals, revelations that could change the way you see yourself and the world. But there is a price for this illumination. The torch does not simply reveal, it devours memory itself. As soon as you lower the flame, the knowledge you gained dissolves, leaving you with nothing but the sense that something vital has been lost. Would you choose to hold this torch? Would you rather experience the ecstasy of knowing, even for a heartbeat, or remain untouched by truths you cannot keep? Consider the simplest example. You suspect someone you love is lying to you. You lift the torch. In the momentary blaze, you see everything. The betrayal laid bare in exquisite, unbearable detail. Your mind records every word, every expression, but the instant you douse the flame, it all vanishes. You cannot remember what you discovered. You only remember that you saw. You are left with a hollow certainty that something broke, without any way to prove or name it. This is a more intimate cruelty than ignorance. Ignorance is blankness, no mark, no wound. But this is the shape of absence itself, a scar without a story. The flame that forgets leaves you in a unique torment. You know there was a revelation, but you cannot reclaim it. This is a mirror to real human experience. Think about dreams you were certain held profound insights, only to fade the moment you opened your eyes. You spend your day haunted by the knowledge that something mattered, but you can never touch it again. In philosophy, this paradox draws us to the nature of truth and the burden of knowing. If knowledge cannot be retained, is it truly knowledge? Or is it a passing hallucination? Some would argue that the value of revelation is in its permanence, that an insight that cannot be integrated into memory or behavior is meaningless. But others would insist that even a fleeting vision transforms you. The moment you saw the truth, you were not the same. Even if you forgot the details, your being was reshaped by the force of that contact. Consider the example of someone who is terminally ill and offered a glimpse beyond death, an instant where all the mysteries of existence are laid bare. For a heartbeat, they see exactly what waits beyond life. But the flame burns the memory away. When they return to themselves, they cannot describe or recall what they witnessed. Only the certainty remains. There was something. Would this be comforting, or would it be a fresh horror to live with the knowledge that you once understood everything but can no longer say what it was? In modern life, the flame that forgets has subtle reflections. Think of the endless stream of information we consume, articles, videos, posts. For a moment, each fragment seems to light the darkness. We feel illuminated, almost wise. But hours later, it is all gone, replaced by a vague conviction that we once knew more than we do now. The difference is that, in our world, we choose this cycle of forgetting. We have built our torch out of distraction, novelty, and overstimulation. The question then becomes, is it better to have never learned, or to have learned and lost the memory? What would you sacrifice to experience unfiltered truth, knowing it will slip away like water through your hands? Some spiritual traditions suggest that the ultimate truths cannot be retained because the mind is too small to hold them. Mystical experiences, moments of unity with the divine, often fade into oblivion the moment they pass. Those who return from such states struggle to describe what they felt. They say it was more real than life itself, but their words fail. The torch illuminated them so completely that the self they brought back cannot contain the experience. In this sense, the flame that forgets is a mercy. It prevents you from being crushed by truths too large for a mortal mind. But the price is loneliness. You walk through the rest of your life knowing you were touched by something vast and nameless, but you can never share it. Never even share it with yourself. Imagine an entire culture built around this torch, a society where the greatest achievements are revelations that no one can remember. Priests hold the flame over ancient scrolls, scholars glimpse the ultimate answers to existence, and then all that remains is the conviction that they once knew. History becomes a procession of blind sages, each marked by an invisible knowledge, and when these sages speak, their authority is absolute, not because they can prove what they saw, but because everyone recognizes that look in their eyes, the look of one who has glimpsed a truth too searing to survive the light. This is the final question the flame that forgets demands you ask yourself. If you had the chance to illuminate the darkness and discover something so true, it might transform you forever, but you could never recall it. Would you dare to hold the torch? Would you be content with a life lit by flashes of impossible clarity, or would you cling to the safer comfort of blindness? There is no right answer. Only the awareness that the choice itself defines you. To desire the flame, even knowing it will burn away the memory, is to confess that knowledge matters to you more than safety. To turn away is to admit that ignorance has its own quiet dignity. In the end, perhaps the most profound secret of the flame that forgets is not what it shows you, but what it leaves behind. The haunting certainty that truth exists, just beyond your grasp, and that for a moment, you touched it. The coin that remembers. Imagine a coin small enough to hide in your palm. At first glance, it looks unremarkable, a circle of dull metal, its edges worn smooth by centuries of touch. But what if this single coin had passed through countless hands, each one leaving an invisible imprint? Kings pressing it into the palms of generals as payment for conquest, beggars clutching it with trembling fingers in the hope of a loaf of bread, merchants counting it among thousands on the scales of profit. Imagine that every choice, every fear, every moment of triumph or desperation, bound up with its exchange, had never truly faded, that each life it touched left behind an echo. We rarely think about coins as anything but instruments, means to an end. Yet money is the great connector of human destiny. A single coin can travel farther than most people ever will, bridging empires and villages, wealth and poverty, life and death. If you could trace the lineage of such a coin, you would follow a secret river that runs beneath the surface of history itself. You would see how every decision, every bargain, every sacrifice cascaded outward, shaping the course of countless lives in ways no one could have predicted. Close your eyes and picture the first hand that held it. Perhaps it was forged under torchlight in a workshop where hammers rang through cold air. A craftsman with scarred fingers stamped the king's mark into its surface, never suspecting that his own great-grandchildren might one day beg for scraps paid for with that same coin. From there, it passed into a treasury chest, a glittering hoard destined to pay soldiers to hold a frontier. A king, crowned in a ceremony thick with incense and iron, once clasped this coin and wondered whether his reign would last longer than the metal in his hand. Years later, the same coin surfaced in the market of a conquered city. It bought grain from a farmer who stared at the horizon, wondering whether to abandon his land or wait for the next army to come. The coin passed on, its value unchanged, but carrying an unspoken weight, an inheritance of desperation. A merchant received it in a heavy purse and carried it across the sea, where it bought spices and silk. Each time it changed hands, it absorbed another silent record. The flicker of greed in an eye, the dull resignation of poverty, the soft hope of a mother trading for medicine. Imagine if that record could be read, not as words etched on the coin's face, but as sensations that would fill your mind the instant you touched it. You would feel the cold terror of the thief who stole it, and the flicker of triumph when he slipped away unseen. You would feel the grief of the widow who used it to pay for her husband's burial shroud. You would feel the elation of the gambler who risked everything, and, for one brief heartbeat, held the illusion that fate was on his side. If you knew all that, if you felt it as vividly as your own memories, would you still spend the coin? Or would you fear that in doing so, you were binding yourself to the lives it had already shaped? What if the coin was not just a record, but a carrier of something more, a subtle contagion of destiny, a thought, an impulse, an echo that could pass from hand to hand the way a disease spreads through a city? Perhaps you would believe you were immune to such superstition, that a coin is only metal, inert and indifferent. But what if every time it was exchanged, a trace of its past clung to the new owner's mind? a slight nudge of decision, a faint tug of mood. You might never notice it consciously, but your life would drift a degree off course without explanation. A king once decided to start a war holding this coin. A beggar once decided to end his life for lack of it. When you spent it, what decision would it push you toward? History is filled with objects we treat as symbols. A sword that crowned an empire, a crown that passed from dynasty to dynasty. But perhaps the humblest artifacts, the ones we overlook, are the truest witnesses to our collective story. A coin slips through more lives than any jewel or scepter. Its surface wears smooth, yet it never loses the power to decide whether a child eats, whether a journey begins, whether a promise is kept. Consider how many times this single coin might have been the difference between surrender and survival. A farmer debating whether to pay his taxes or feed his children. A young woman gathering every scrap of silver she could find to ransom her brother from a dungeon. A dying man offering it to a priest in exchange for a whispered prayer. Each time, the coin became more than currency. It became a vessel of choices so numerous and tangled that no ledger could ever account for them. Imagine you discover this coin one day, nestled in the seam of an old coat or hidden in the corner of a drawer. At first, it looks no different from the others in your purse. But when you pick it up, you feel something, like a pressure behind your eyes, a rush of impressions too quick to grasp. You sense the weight of the lives it has passed through. You glimpse faces you've never met, hear voices you cannot place. It is only an instant, but when it passes, your hand feels heavier, as though you are holding the condensed burden of human struggle itself. Would you set it aside, fearing its influence, or would you be tempted to spend it, to see whether its journey would continue through you, whether you would become another story the coin remembers? Perhaps that is the true secret of money, that it is not merely a tool of exchange, but a chain binding strangers across time. We inherit its unseen histories, its forgotten sorrows and triumphs. And when we pass it on, we give a little of ourselves in return. So the next time you hold a coin, pause. Imagine all the lives it has touched, all the moments it has witnessed. Beggars and kings, gamblers and lovers, soldiers and thieves. Consider whether you are merely spending it or becoming part of a vast, unbroken ledger written in silent transactions. And when you ask yourself whether you would spend the coin that remembers, know this. In some sense, every coin does. Everyone is an artifact of our shared story, a record of how far we will go for survival, for hope, for a chance at something better. Perhaps the question is not whether you would spend it, but whether you are willing to be changed by it. Because once you touch it, you cannot pretend you are untouched by all it has carried. And maybe in the end, that is the coin's final lesson. That none of us moves through history alone. We are all part of an endless exchange, passing the same invisible burdens from one life to the next. The Watcher's Paradox. Imagine being told with perfect certainty that you are never alone, that every thought, every fleeting impulse, every private shame is witnessed in detail by an observer who will never look away. At first, you imagine some faceless intelligence perched above the world, cataloging your life like an insect pinned to a board. But then you learn the truth, and it is stranger than any myth. The Watcher is you. You, from a future you haven't lived yet. You, older and perhaps wiser, gazing backward across the years with eyes that see everything you were and everything you are becoming. The moment you hear this, your sense of reality begins to split. Is this destiny, a fixed timeline in which you are always the same person, orbiting your own story in an endless loop? Or is it a form of surveillance so intimate that it masquerades as fate? This is the Watcher's Paradox, a riddle that dissolves the boundary between self and other, privacy and predestination. Consider what it means to be observed by your future self. Every action you take is no longer hidden, even in the silence of your mind. Every mistake is a monument you will someday study. There is no sanctuary in forgetfulness, because one day you will recall it all in perfect clarity. This thought alone is enough to change how you behave. You begin to monitor yourself, preemptively curating your thoughts so that your future witness will find something noble, or at least defensible. But this raises an unsettling question. If you are acting differently because you know your future self is watching, is that truly free will? Or is it just a performance staged for the one audience that can never leave? Imagine waking each morning with this knowledge. You pour your coffee, and as you lift the cup, you feel the invisible gaze of the person you will become. You choose your words carefully in every conversation, aware that the echo of your voice will someday replay in your own mind. You cannot escape this scrutiny. There is no door to close, no darkness to hide in. Even your most private thoughts are like pages in a book your future self will eventually read. Perhaps you think this would make you more virtuous, but virtue born of surveillance is not really virtue at all. It is a transaction, an attempt to purchase the approval of your own memory. There is an old philosophical question. Can you ever truly know yourself? The Watcher's paradox answers with a cruel certainty. Yes, you can. And in knowing yourself, you become your own warden. You become the authority you fear and the prisoner you pity. You might believe that having such perfect knowledge will free you from regret, that it will make you wiser. But wisdom without mercy is another name for judgment, and judgment without any hope of forgetting is a life sentence you impose on yourself. Some people find comfort in the idea of destiny, a pre-written script in which all your struggles have meaning because they are leading you to an ordained conclusion. But destiny feels different when it is you doing the recording. When the future self observing you is not some transcendent being, but simply the version of you who has survived longer. Because then, you are not merely fulfilling a fate, you are policing yourself, shaping each choice to look good in the final report. This is why the Watcher's paradox feels like surveillance dressed up in the robes of destiny. It promises significance. Every moment matters because every moment is witnessed. But it also steals your privacy, even the privacy you keep from yourself. Imagine a moment when you are tempted to betray your principles. Perhaps you feel the impulse to lie, to steal, to lash out in anger. In a world without the Watcher, you might wrestle with that impulse privately. If you falter, the shame would fade with time. But under this invisible gaze, you can never pretend it did not happen. Your future self has already seen the moment you failed, already cataloged it. You cannot edit the record. You cannot plead ignorance. You can only wait for the day when you become the Watcher, and you are forced to relive every unguarded weakness from the other side of time. This is the hidden cruelty of the paradox. It punishes you twice, once in the moment of the act, and again in the moment of recollection. And yet, it is also an extraordinary gift. Imagine the power of understanding your own life in such totality. Every decision, every crossroad illuminated by hindsight. You would see patterns you could never perceive in the confusion of the present. You would know the precise reasons why you loved, why you grieved, why you became who you are. But the price of this omniscience is steep. You surrender all the small dignities that come from forgetting. You give up the right to bury your regrets under the sediment of time. The Watcher's paradox asks whether you would trade your illusions for perfect clarity, knowing that the clarity will cost you the illusion of freedom. Think of it like this. Imagine you are sitting in a theater, watching a film of your own life. You see yourself as a child, trusting and afraid. You see your first heartbreak, your first triumph, the 1,000 quiet compromises that shaped you. You might feel compassion for that earlier self, but you will also feel disappointment, because you will see every selfish impulse, every cowardice you once rationalized away. And in that moment, you will understand the terrible truth. The person you are watching is still you. You can never fully forgive or fully condemn them because to do so is to judge yourself. And no one is as harsh a critic as the future self, who knows exactly how much better you could have been. So is this destiny? A script you were always going to perform? Or is it surveillance, a mirror you hold to yourself so you can never look away from what you have done? The answer depends on whether you believe time is a line or a circle. If time is linear, your future self is simply remembering, harmlessly. But if time is a loop, every moment of observation feeds back into the past, shaping it, controlling it. The Watcher is not merely an observer, but an accomplice to your decisions. In this vision, there is no free will, only the illusion of it, carefully maintained to keep you from despair. Perhaps that is the most unsettling part of all. Not that you are being watched, but that you are the one watching. That you are both prisoner and guard, sinner and confessor. That you are the author of your own surveillance. And you will never know whether you are acting freely or simply performing the role you think your future self demands. So the next time you feel alone, remember the Watcher's paradox. Remember that the silence around you might not be empty. It might be filled with your own unseen gaze, waiting for the day when past and future meet, and the story you thought was private is revealed to have always been an open book. And ask yourself, is that destiny, Or is it the most elaborate disguise surveillance has ever worn? The scroll that writes you. Imagine a scroll lying on a pedestal in a chamber lit by flickering lanterns. Its parchment seems ordinary at first glance, the ink dark and precise. But as you lean closer, you notice something unsettling. Your name is written at the top, and the lines beneath recount your life, your earliest memories, the moments you've cherished, the mistakes you wish you could erase. And as your eyes follow the text, you realize with a tightening dread that the words are shifting. Your past is not fixed. Every time you read the scroll, it updates. It reinterprets events, inserts new details, deletes old certainties. It remakes the story you've been telling yourself since you first learned how to remember. The question is simple, but devastating. If your origin story keeps changing, can you still claim to be the author of your life? Or are you merely the sum of whatever narrative the scroll decides to craft in this moment? We tend to think of memory as a foundation, something stable we can build upon. The idea that our past is fluid feels like an assault on the very idea of selfhood. If you can no longer trust the story of where you came from, how can you trust anything about who you are? But this is not just a thought experiment. In real life, memory is far more like the scroll than we admit. Neuroscience has shown that each time we recall a memory, we don't retrieve it unchanged, we reconstruct it. And each reconstruction introduces small alterations. Over time, the accumulated distortions can transform a memory into something almost unrecognizable. Imagine a childhood moment, perhaps a day when you felt loved and safe. You remember your mother's voice, the warmth of the sun on your face, the smell of freshly baked bread. But with each retelling, the details blur. Was it really summer? Did she really say those exact words? Was the bread even there? Or is that a later association stitched into the memory? The scroll you carry in your mind updates itself every time you glance back. But the scroll on the pedestal is more powerful. Its edits are not small distortions, but complete rewrites. One day you read it and learn you were born in a distant village you've never heard of. The next, it claims you were raised in the city, your parents strangers you met only later. Each version feels as real as the last. Each time you close your eyes, the memories adjust to fit the new text. You are no longer sure whether you are remembering or imagining. Consider how this might feel. You have built your identity on the belief that you are the result of a single, continuous history. You have made decisions, whom to love, what to value, what to fear, based on that history. But now, the foundation crumbles. If the scroll can alter your past at will, then what is the self you cling to so desperately? Is it just a story, a collection of impressions that can be revised and overwritten without your consent? Some would say this is a nightmare. The loss of a stable origin feels like the loss of all meaning. But perhaps there is another way to see it. Perhaps the scroll is not your enemy, but a reminder that identity is always a work in progress. That you are never trapped in the mistakes or limitations of the past, because the past itself is not as rigid as you believed. In this view, the scroll is not a curse, but an invitation to become the author, to participate consciously in the rewriting. Yet here is where the paradox deepens. If you can influence the scroll, if you can decide what gets written, then you reclaim your agency. But the moment you look away, the scroll resumes its own revisions. You are never fully in control. You are always negotiating with an unseen editor, some force that has access to your memories in a way you never will. Think of the stories you tell about yourself, the way you explain why you are the way you are. You might say, "I'm cautious because my trust was betrayed," or "I'm driven because I grew up with nothing." But what if those stories are only the latest version the scroll has offered you? What if the original events were entirely different, and the reasons you give yourself are as mutable as ink on parchment? Does this knowledge liberate you, or does it hollow you out? Imagine standing before the scroll and watching it shift. One moment, you see an account of a life shaped by loss. The next, a life shaped by privilege. Each version generates new memories, new emotions, new rationalizations. You feel yourself becoming and unbecoming in a continuous cycle of reinvention. And in that moment, you must ask, what is the real you? The constant across all these revisions. Some philosophers argue that the self is nothing more than the pattern that persists through change. That even if your memories are fluid, there is still a continuity in the way you respond to them, the tone of your inner voice, the questions you ask, the fears that linger no matter how many times the scroll rewrites the cause. Perhaps that is your true authorship, not the story itself, but the stance you take toward the story as it evolves. But there is also something deeply unsettling in this idea. If the scroll keeps rewriting your origins, then no apology you give, no triumph you celebrate, is ever fully anchored in a single unbroken narrative. You must live with the knowledge that your certainty is provisional, that tomorrow you might wake up to a new version of yourself. And yet, maybe this is closer to the truth of what it means to be human than any comforting illusion of permanence. We are all living in the tension between the stories we tell and the memories that betray us. We are all negotiating with the scroll, whether we admit it or not. So the next time you find yourself recalling your past, summoning the images and words that explain who you are, remember that you are also reading a scroll that writes you as you read. It is both a record and a creator, both a witness and an architect. And perhaps the most honest thing you can do is to accept that your authorship is shared, that you are not the sole storyteller, but the one who decides how to face the shifting tale. In the end, maybe this is not a loss, but an opportunity. If the scroll can update your past, it means you are never truly finished, that your life is not a closed book, but an unfolding manuscript. And the question is not whether you are the author in the purest sense, but whether you have the courage to keep reading, even when you know the words may change again tomorrow. The toothless god's curse. Imagine a god who once terrified nations, a deity whose name was spoken in hushed voices, whose symbol was carved into walls as both a plea and a warning. Imagine this god promising storms and miracles, curses and blessings, declaring dominion over life and death. But over centuries, the fear that fed this god began to wane. People stopped believing in the old rituals. They stopped kneeling in the darkness to whisper prayers. They stopped fearing the punishment that never came. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the god's voice grew softer, its threats less convincing, its fangs dull, until it became what it is now, a toothless god, a relic of an older terror, reduced to stories told around a fading fire. And yet, even stripped of power, this god still speaks. It speaks in riddles and half-remembered promises, hoping that someone, somewhere, will believe again and breathe life into its hollow shell. Because a god without worshippers is not a god at all. It is an echo, a mirror reflecting the emptiness of human certainty. What does it mean to be a deity who has lost the power to inspire dread? Perhaps you have met such a god without realizing it. Every time you encounter an idea that once shaped civilization, but now feels quaint or absurd, you stand in the presence of a toothless divinity. The notion that kings rule by divine right, the conviction that the stars foretell our fates, the belief that unseen beings sit in judgment of every thought. Each was once a god to someone, an absolute force no less real than the air they breathed. And each has, in time, been declawed by doubt, softened by ridicule, made harmless by neglect. But here is where it becomes more unsettling. A powerless god is not simply a creation we discard when it no longer suits us. It is a mirror held up to our own need to believe, to invest ordinary symbols with extraordinary significance. If a god's only strength is the faith we give it, then divinity itself becomes a reflection of our collective imagination. The toothless god is a reminder that power is never intrinsic. It is always granted. When belief dies, so does authority. Think about the old temples that now stand in ruin, their idols chipped and weathered. Once those idols demanded sacrifice. They commanded armies. They brokered peace between warring tribes. Now, they are inert stone. If you touch them, nothing stirs. If you pray to them, no voice answers. But if enough people began to believe again, if the old rites were restored, the same stones would again be filled with power. The curse is not that the god was ever false. The curse is that it can only exist in the space between fear and faith. Consider what this means for your own convictions. Every belief you hold, every certainty you defend, might be a toothless god in waiting. Today it feels unshakable. Tomorrow, it may feel like an empty superstition. The authority you invest in institutions, in symbols, in sacred words, all of it depends on a consensus that can fracture without warning. And when it does, when everyone stops believing at once, the god loses its teeth. The rules collapse. The taboo evaporates. There is something both liberating and terrifying in this realization. It means you are not as bound as you imagine, but it also means that nothing you cherish is immune to the erosion of doubt. Even the ideas you think of as absolute, justice, destiny, love, require a continual act of faith. When that faith falters, the idea begins to decay. If you look closely at history, you see this pattern over and over. The empires that fell when their gods lost prestige, the revolutions that erupted when sacred authority was exposed as theater, the quiet transformation that happens when people decide the old rules no longer apply. A toothless God is a prophecy about everything we rely on to hold our worlds together. It asks a question no one likes to answer. If power lies only in belief, who is really in charge, the God or the believer? Sometimes the last revenge of a dying God is to force you to see yourself in its decline, to make you realize that all along it was your faith that made it terrible, your fear that made it mighty. When that fear recedes, when the illusion is pierced, the God stands revealed as an empty vessel. It can still speak, but its words have no weight. It can still threaten, but its fangs are gone. And yet, there is something poignant in the toothless God's persistence. It keeps whispering its riddles because it remembers a time when the world trembled at its voice. It keeps hoping that the old terror can be rekindled. If you ever feel certain that you have outgrown superstition, remember how quickly new faiths can take hold, how swiftly a powerless idol can be resurrected if only enough people need something to fear or worship. This is the curse, to be neither fully dead nor truly alive, to exist in a limbo of half-belief. The toothless God cannot let go of its former dominion, and you cannot entirely let go of the part of yourself that yearns for something larger to surrender to. So you stand facing each other, the God that cannot bite and the believer who cannot fully disbelieve, each reflecting the other's weakness, each revealing that power is always a contract, an agreement to pretend together. In the end, perhaps the most unsettling thought is that the toothless God is not just an artifact of history. It is the shape of every conviction we hold too tightly. The moment we stop questioning, stop examining, stop remembering that all authority is lent rather than owned, we risk becoming worshippers again, fearful, obedient, giving our strength to something that may have no teeth at all. So ask yourself, when you feel the old dread, when you hear the whisper of the God that once ruled you, do you still believe? Or have you learned to see through the riddle to the hollow mouth behind it? Would you rather cling to the comfort of that illusion or face the truth that all power, divine or human, depends on your consent to believe it is real? The web that thinks. Imagine a web suspended in the dark between stars, its threads shimmering like filaments of frozen lightning. At the center crouches a spider woven from stardust itself, a being that does not merely watch, but calculates. Its method of measuring time is unlike anything you could conceive. It counts seconds by the vibrations of pain. Each tremor of sorrow traveling along the silk becomes a unit of chronology. Every ache, every grief, every hidden wound is registered, numbered, recorded in the geometry of the web. This is the web that thinks. It is a metaphor, but also a question carved into the hidden marrow of existence. If emotion defines the passage of time, does suffering lengthen your life by making every moment linger, or does it consume you, hollowing years to husks? To explore this, think of the nights you lay awake, mind flaring with regret or loss. Time becomes elastic in agony. A single hour can feel like a century, each heartbeat amplified into a drumbeat of despair. You look at the clock and find that only minutes have passed, though your soul feels aged by decades. The web that thinks would record those hours, not as ticks of a clock, but as vast gulfs of duration, enormous caverns in the landscape of your life. Sorrow stretches time. It expands each instant to accommodate the immensity of your feeling. But there is a paradox. While sorrow seems to inflate time in the moment, it also devours memory. Consider your worst heartbreak. At the time, it was an unendurable eternity. Now, when you look back, the years around it blur. You cannot reconstruct every day of your mourning, only fragments, the scent of the room, the angle of light through a window, the taste of tears. Trauma lengthens perception as it happens, but erodes your timeline afterward, leaving you with islands of clarity in a sea of forgetting. So did that sorrow make your life longer, richer in experience, or did it steal your time, replacing it with emptiness? This is not merely philosophical abstraction. Neuroscience shows that intense emotion stamps memories more deeply. The amygdala, the the brain's emotional sentinel, signals the hippocampus to encode what matters most. Pain, especially, burns itself into the record, yet it also distorts. When you are terrified or grieving, your sense of sequence shatters. You remember sensations, but lose order. In this sense, the web that thinks is a perfect image of how memory entwines with feeling. The threads tighten, tangle, and sometimes snap under the weight of suffering. Consider the survivors of catastrophe. Ask them how long their ordeal lasted, and you will hear impossibilities. An earthquake that lasted 20 seconds felt like hours. A siege that spanned years felt like a single endless day. The spider in the web would not measure time by calendars or clocks, but by the amplitude of each shock wave of terror and sorrow. To it, a life of safety would look short, almost imperceptible. A life of trauma would glow bright and sprawling. But what does this mean for how you judge your own existence? If the density of feeling is what grants an experience its gravity, then perhaps sorrow is a kind of perverse nourishment, stretching you, expanding your capacity to feel, to remember, to be. You could say that pain makes you more alive because it refuses to let you drift numbly through your days. Every loss marks you, every regret etches a deeper channel into your awareness. But you could also argue the opposite, that sorrow steals your life because it commandeers your attention, robs you of peace, and traps you in recursive loops of suffering. Imagine a prisoner pacing a tiny cell. To an outside observer, a year passes in the same way it passes for a free person. But to the prisoner, every moment is magnified by longing, boredom, dread. The web that thinks would record that year as a colossal tapestry of sensation, the strands taut with unrelenting feeling. In this way, confinement becomes a form of forced time expansion. Yet, ask the prisoner if they feel their life has been lengthened or stolen, and you will hear a truth as bitter as the air in that cell. The same dynamic unfolds in ordinary heartbreak. When you love someone who leaves, time dislocates. Days crawl, weeks sprawl into deserts. The web that thinks grows fat on the vibrations of your sorrow, measuring every pulse of missing them. And when at last the pain recedes, you emerge altered, unsure whether you have lived through an epic or wasted uncountable hours on a person who is now only a silhouette in your mind. There is also the question of choice. If you knew that every sorrow would stretch your life in this strange way, would you welcome it? Would you allow yourself to feel deeply, knowing it makes time dense and almost unbearable? Or would you protect yourself, dull your senses, live in a kind of emotional twilight to keep your days smooth and uniform? The web that thinks cannot answer that for you. It only counts. It does not care whether you interpret the vibrations as proof of your aliveness or evidence of your ruin. Some spiritual traditions argue that suffering is the crucible in which the self is forged. Only by enduring profound loss can you discover the depths of your own resilience. In this view, sorrow does not steal life. It expands it by revealing your hidden dimensions. You become more capacious, more compassionate, more aware. Others contend that suffering is senseless, an erosion of the soul that leaves nothing in its wake but scars. Ultimately, this is the riddle the web that thinks poses. When you look back on your life, will you see a tapestry of rich, difficult experience that lengthened your existence, or a chronicle of stolen days consumed by pain? There is no simple resolution. Perhaps the answer is that both are true. Sorrow stretches time and steals it. It gives and it takes. It illuminates and it erases. Like the spider of stardust, your consciousness spins its web from every tremor that touches you, mapping a private universe where joy and grief are the only clocks that matter. And maybe that is the secret. In the end, all you can do is choose to stand in the center of your own web, feeling every vibration, counting every shiver of the threads, and accept that the measure of your days is not how long they lasted, but how fully you inhabited them, however much it hurt. The breath of stone. Imagine a statue carved from a single block of stone so ancient that the quarry it came from has been swallowed by the earth. Imagine its surface, cold and unyielding, worn smooth by centuries of wind and rain. To most who pass by, it is nothing more than a relic, an ornament of a vanished civilization. But legend says that every 1,000 years, this statue draws a single silent breath. No one knows why. Some claim it is the remnant of a god's spirit trapped in mineral form. Others believe it is the final heartbeat of a species that died before our ancestors ever learned to speak. The breath itself is imperceptible to the eye. You could stand before the statue for decades and see no movement. But if you happen to be near when the moment arrives, you will feel it on your skin, a faint current of air, neither warm nor cold, brushing your face as gently as a sigh. For a heartbeat, the world will fall still. And if you hear it, everything you have ever known will be washed away. All your memories, your name, your loves and fears, the entire narrative of your life, erased. In their place, there will be only a single truth. One truth so clear, so unshakable, that it will become the sole foundation of your existence. You will not be able to explain it. You will not even remember how you came to know it. But you will feel it like a weight in your bones, an undeniable certainty that eclipses all other knowledge. What kind of truth would be worth such a price? Some who have studied the legends say the truth might be cosmic, a revelation about the birth of the universe or the final fate of all things. Others suspect it is personal, a hidden fact about your own life that you have never glimpsed. And there are those who believe it is simpler still, a single word or idea that contains more meaning than all human libraries combined. Imagine stepping into the temple where the statue stands. Columns loom overhead, their capitals carved with symbols no scholar has ever deciphered. The floor is paved with stones polished by countless feet. Dust hangs in the air, catching the dawn light like drifting embers. You approach the statue and feel your heart begin to pound. It is not just the enormity of the place or the weight of history pressing down on you. It is the knowledge that at any moment this silent figure could breathe, and in that instant, everything you are could be undone. Would you dare to remain? Would you risk your memories for the chance to learn something no other living being could ever know? To hold a truth that can never be doubted or lost, even though it would cost you the entire story of yourself? Consider what memory means to you. It is the scaffolding of your identity, the chain of moments that tells you who you are. Without it, you are not merely confused, you are unmade. Yet, there is a part of every human spirit that hungers for absolutes, for something that transcends the shifting sands of experience, a truth that does not depend on perspective or belief. The breath of the statue offers this, but only to those who are willing to surrender everything else. Imagine you decide to wait. Days pass. You watch the sun trace its path across the temple walls. You eat little, sleep less. You begin to wonder if you are mad. But then, in the hour just before dawn, the air grows impossibly still. You feel a subtle pressure in your chest, as if the world itself is holding its breath, and then you hear it. A sound so quiet it is almost silence, a whisper that seems to come from inside the stone. In that instant, your memories vanish. You are not afraid because you no longer remember what fear is. All that remains is the truth. Perhaps it is the knowledge that all things are one, that every life is a single note in a music too vast to be heard by any mind but the universe itself. Perhaps it is the certainty that love is the only force that survives the grave. Or perhaps it is something even simpler, a realization so perfect in its clarity that it leaves no room for regret. When the temple's doors open again and others find you, they will see a person with clear eyes and an untroubled face. They will ask you your name, and you will not know it. They will try to remind you of your past, but it will be like trying to teach a stone to speak. You will not grieve for what you have lost, because you will not even remember losing it. All you will have is the truth, shining inside you like a hidden star. Some would call this fate a tragedy. Others would envy it beyond measure, but none can say what the truth is. Only that it cannot be shared. It belongs to you alone, a final secret that no language can hold. Imagine living the rest of your days as a vessel for that single certainty. You would eat, sleep, and speak as others do, but nothing could touch the center of your being. No sorrow could undo you, because you would no longer have any story to mourn. No praise could flatter you, because you would no longer remember ambition or shame. You would be free in a way few ever are, free of history, free of doubt, free of the endless questions that gnaw at every thinking mind. But you would also be alone, alone in the knowledge that your truth sets you apart from every other soul, that no matter how kindly others speak to you, they will never glimpse the world as you now do. So you must ask yourself, if you stood in that temple and felt the breath of stone, would you consider it a gift or a curse? Would you call it enlightenment or annihilation? Perhaps the answer is both. Perhaps true understanding always comes at the cost of everything that came before. The life you once loved, the people you once cherished, the story you once believed was unshakable, gone in an instant, and in their place, something vast, quiet, and irrevocable. And so, if you ever find yourself before such a statue, listening for that 1,000-year breath, you must decide whether you value your memories more than the promise of knowing something that no other human could ever claim. Whether you would trade the tangled garden of your life for a single perfect seed of truth. Whether you would risk becoming a stranger to yourself in exchange for a certainty that cannot be doubted or denied. Because once you hear the breath of stone, there is no going back. There is only the silence of all you have forgotten, and the radiance of the one thing you can never forget. The faces of echo. Imagine you are standing before a wall lined with masks, each carved in the likeness of a different emotion. You lift one mask to your face, a smile shaped in perfect serenity, and you feel the shift begin. Your voice softens, your gestures grow warm, and the people around you relax, believing that the calm you project must be real. But beneath the polished surface, you know this is only a borrowed expression, an echo of what you wish to be. And when night falls, that mask does not sleep. It whispers its gentle assurances into your dreams, replaying your day in comforting tones, until you half believe its illusions. This is the first face of echo, the mask that soothes, that teaches you how to pretend, that becomes your shield. And yet, it is only one of many. Beside it hangs another mask, this one twisted in sorrow. When you wear it, your shoulders hunch as though you carry a weight no one else can see. Your voice grows brittle. You share the stories of your losses, and others nod with sympathy. They do not know that this grief is as curated as the smile before it. You have learned to display it when it is useful, to gather comfort, to deflect questions, to remind yourself that feeling something, even pain, is better than feeling nothing. And when you sleep, this mask mourns in your stead. It conjures memories of disappointment so vivid they feel like fresh wounds. This is the second face of echo, the mask that laments, that weeps when you no longer can. Then there is the mask of anger. Its mouth is carved open in an eternal roar. When you wear it, your heartbeat accelerates. Your words sharpen into weapons. You feel the pleasure of righteous fury, the clarity that comes when you stop caring who you might hurt. Later, when you peel it away, you tell yourself the rage was an accident, an impulse beyond your control. But in truth, you know exactly where you keep that mask, and exactly why you reach for it. When you dream, this face shouts accusations in your voice, reminding you that even your darkest feelings have always belonged to you. We spend our lives collecting these masks. Some are gifts from our families, expectations molded to fit our features before we could object. Some are forged by experience, the aftermath of trauma or triumph. And some are choices, deliberate experiments in becoming someone new. At first, each mask feels like a temporary costume. You wear it to survive a particular moment, a funeral, an interview, a first date. But over time, you notice something unsettling. The masks begin to speak on their own. When you are too tired to maintain the performance, their voices fill the void. They narrate your life in the dark, telling you what to remember, what to regret, what to desire. These are the faces of echo, expressions that once belonged to you but have learned to exist without your conscious permission. And so comes the question that haunts you most. If each mask has its own voice, and each voice tells a different story, which one is the true self? When you dream, are you the mask that cries or the mask that lies? Are you the serenity you show the world or the turmoil that festers behind your ribs? In your waking hours, you can pretend to choose. You can curate your performance to match the situation. But when you sleep, there is no audience to impress, no strategy to uphold. The masks slip free, and their voices argue in your mind. One weeps for all you have lost. One snarls that you deserve better. One coos that everything will be fine. And you, caught between them, are left wondering if any of these voices is truly yours. Consider a moment when you betrayed your own values, when you said yes out of fear, when you stayed silent because the cost of honesty seemed too high. In the morning, you wore the mask of composure, assuring everyone and yourself that it was the right choice. But that night, as you drifted towards sleep, another voice rose from the shadows. It told you that you were a coward, that your silence made you complicit. It is here, in this collision of echoes, that your identity splinters, because you cannot silence all of them. Each mask insists that it is the real you, the only authentic reflection. And perhaps they are all correct. Perhaps the self is not a single face, but a chorus of contradictory masks, each with its own claim on your soul. This idea is older than you might think. In ancient Greece, actors wore masks to signal character and mood. The mask was not a disguise. It was a revelation, a declaration of the role you would play. But when the performance ended, the actors set the mask aside and reclaimed their private self. Today, we never set them aside. The performance is constant. We are trained from childhood to curate our expressions, to hide our confusion behind certainty, to bury our grief beneath humor. And in this relentless theater, we lose track of where the mask ends and the face begins. The voices of the masks become so familiar that we cannot distinguish them from our own thoughts. So, what happens when one of these masks begins to lie? Imagine the mask you wear to reassure others, the pleasant expression that says, "I am fine." Over time, that voice seeps into your dreams, whispering the same lie until you believe it. You stop noticing your own exhaustion, your own quiet despair. The mask has colonized your awareness. It speaks so persuasively that you forget there was ever any other truth. Or imagine the opposite, a mask that weeps so convincingly that you come to see yourself as permanently broken, incapable of joy. Even when good things happen, the mask tells you they are temporary, undeserved. In your sleep, you replay every failure, every humiliation. You wake up heavy with sadness you cannot explain. This is the danger of the faces of echo. Each mask begins as a tool, a way to navigate the expectations of the world. But over time, they gather power. They accumulate memories, refine their stories, perfect their performances. They become sentient fragments of your identity. And in the quiet hours when no one is watching, they emerge to remind you that you are not a single self, but a collection of borrowed expressions. So which mask do you wear when you dream? The one that lies to protect you, or the one that weeps to keep you honest? Are you the mask that rages, demanding justice, or the mask that consoles, offering forgiveness? Perhaps the answer is all of them. Perhaps the truest self is not the face behind the masks, but the space in which they argue, the witness to their clamor, the quiet awareness that endures after every echo has spent itself. And if that is true, then maybe there is no need to choose. Maybe you can let the masks have their say without mistaking their voices for commands. You can learn to hear the lie without believing it, to feel the sorrow without surrendering to it, because the masks will never stop speaking. They will never stop telling you who you are, who you should be, what you must fear. But you are not only the mask that lies. You are not only the mask that weeps. You are the one who listens. And in that listening, you may finally find the self that no mask can imitate. The ice that burns. Imagine you are standing alone in a stone chamber where no fire has ever been lit. A single object rests in the center, a cube of ice so cold it shimmers with an almost supernatural stillness. Its surface looks harmless, like any ordinary frozen shape, but you know the legends. They say this ice can burn, not your skin, but something deeper, something no medicine can heal. If you dare to touch it, the memories you have clung to, the ones that define you, will sear away as if they were never yours to keep. You reach out, your hand trembling, because you have come here seeking clarity. You have grown weary of the fog that clouds your past, the half-truths you told yourself to survive, the comforting stories you wrapped around the parts of your life you could not bear to face. You think that maybe, just maybe, if you feel this cold enough, you will finally understand who you really are. But in the final moment, before your fingers meet the ice, you hesitate, because the question strikes you with sudden force. If clarity requires pain, is numbness an act of cowardice or an expression of mercy? For most of us, pain has always been the price of truth. To remember fully is to remember the moments you failed, the betrayals you committed, the times you looked away when you should have acted. These are not the memories we proudly display. They hide in the dim corners of the mind, whispering to us in restless dreams. We instinctively shield ourselves from them because we know how sharp they can be when we look too closely. But the ice that burns does not care about your fear. It is pure and indifferent. To touch it is to feel every lie stripped away, every illusion melted into nothing, leaving only the raw, unsoftened facts. And this, paradoxically, is where the burn begins. Not in the absence of sensation, but in the unrelenting exposure. You have nowhere left to hide from what you have been and what you have done. The clarity you thought would be your liberation becomes a wound. Think of a moment in your own life when you believed forgetting would be easier. Perhaps a time you hurt someone you loved, or a choice that cost you something you can never replace. When you recall it, your heart contracts, your breath catches, and you look for a distraction. A screen, a conversation, anything to push it back into the shadows. We are creatures of avoidance by nature. The mind has evolved to protect us from the injuries of remembrance. But if you could hold that moment in perfect detail, without the filters of time and self-pity, would it heal you or destroy you? This is the paradox of the ice. To seek absolute clarity is to embrace the possibility of absolute pain. And yet, some would say that pain is proof of authenticity. That numbness is merely an anesthetic for the soul, an evasion that costs you your integrity. They would argue that the bravest thing you can do is to reach out and let the cold burn everything false from your memory. But is it truly cowardice to protect yourself from that agony? Is numbness always a lesser path? Or is it a form of grace, a kindness you extend to your own fragile spirit when the truth becomes too heavy to carry? There are moments in every life when survival requires forgetting, when a mind, pushed past endurance, must choose to let the sharpest memories fade if it hopes to endure at all. In trauma therapy, this is not called cowardice. It is called adaptation, a necessary measure to shield a person from the overwhelming flood of feeling that would otherwise drown them. Imagine now that you place your palm against the ice. The cold is beyond anything you've known. It pierces your nerves like needles of glass. Your vision blurs, and for a heartbeat you feel as if you might collapse. And then, as your mind reels, you sense something loosening inside you. Those memories you thought were unshakable begin to flicker and dissolve. You see a childhood room, but the edges fade. You hear a voice calling your name, but it is softer now, almost unrecognizable. The cube takes not only your illusions, but the warmth that once connected you to the past. And when you finally pull your hand away, you are left with a hollow clarity, a knowledge that what was yours is gone, and you cannot retrieve it. Some would say this emptiness is a cleansing, that you have been purified of the stories you clung to out of fear. Others would call it a kind of death, the slow erasure of the self you spent a lifetime constructing. The ice does not distinguish between lies and truths, it simply consumes. And so, the question grows heavier. Is it nobler to endure the burn for the sake of authenticity, or wiser to step back and accept the softness of forgetting? There is no universal answer. What feels like cowardice to one person is an act of mercy to another. What feels like necessary numbness in one season of life can feel like evasion in the next. Consider the metaphor in a different light. Every person carries a reservoir of memory, and within it, certain moments shine brighter and cut deeper. We believe that to forget these moments would be to lose part of ourselves. But sometimes, the unrelenting clarity of memory becomes a prison. Sometimes, to let go, to allow a little numbness, is the only way to step forward. Think of the survivors of great tragedies, those who witnessed horrors that the rest of us can scarcely imagine. For them, the ice that burns is not a myth, but a daily reality. The cold touch of memory threatens to consume them every time they close their eyes. In their case, to numb the burn is not cowardice. It is a survival strategy, a way to reclaim a measure of life in the aftermath of devastation. So, perhaps the truth is this. Clarity and numbness are not enemies. They are partners in the fragile dance of existence. Clarity shows us what is real, even when it hurts. Numbness allows us to live with that knowledge without collapsing. The cube of ice that scalds the soul is neither wholly good nor wholly evil. It is simply a test, a reminder that every act of remembering is a choice, and every choice comes with a price. As you stand in that chamber, hands still tingling from the cold, you understand at last that there is no simple judgment to be made. Sometimes the bravest thing is to look the truth in the eye and endure the burn. And sometimes the greater wisdom is to step back and let yourself forget. Because even the most unflinching clarity cannot exist without the quiet mercy of numbness. And perhaps that is what makes us human, the ability to hold both truths in the same trembling heart. The horn that echoes tomorrow. Imagine an ancient horn, carved from the bone of some creature so old that its name has been lost to time. Its surface is etched with symbols no scholar can fully decipher. But one meaning is clear. This is an instrument that does not merely sound, it summons. To blow the horn is to hear an echo from your own future, a note from a day not yet lived, a sound that crosses the invisible chasm between now and then. But this is no harmless oracle. The horn demands a price. The louder you blow, the farther ahead you hear, but each note tears a fragment from your present. The walls around you fracture, the ground buckles, the bonds you hold most dear begin to unravel. Every blast of revelation costs you solidity, certainty, the life you knew a moment earlier. And so, you stand with the horn in your hand, feeling its cold weight, asking yourself the question no one can answer for you. How loud is too loud? Consider the smallest whisper through the horn, a breath, barely audible. Perhaps you hear your own voice, just hours ahead, reciting a sentence you haven't yet spoken. You feel a thrill, proof that time can be bent, that you are not as bound to this moment as you always believed. The cost is subtle, a mild headache, a fleeting disorientation. A few seconds later you notice your coffee cup has vanished. A small anomaly, you tell yourself. A price worth paying for the confirmation that your future is real. But curiosity is never satisfied with half measures. You inhale again, draw deeper air into your lungs, and sound a stronger note. The horn vibrates against your palms. The echo returns clearer. A door slamming in a room you don't recognize. Someone calling your name with a desperation that chills your blood. Now the cost is no longer subtle. The floor seems to tilt beneath your feet. A crack creeps along the plaster of your ceiling. You look around, and for one horrifying instant, you can't recall where you are or why you came. This is the seduction of knowledge. Each glimpse ahead only sharpens your hunger for more. What if you could hear next week, next year? What if you could hear the last moment of your life? There is a perverse allure in that idea, an end to all doubt, an end to wondering whether the person you love will stay, whether the risks you took will pay off, whether you will be remembered or forgotten. So you raise the horn to your lips again, knowing the cost and choosing it anyway. You blow as hard as your body allows. The note that issues from the horn is immense. It fills your ears, your bones, the spaces between your thoughts. In that terrible resonance, you hear the unmistakable shape of your destiny, the words you will say, the triumphs and betrayals you will endure, the silence that will follow you into death. And when the sound fades, your world is irrevocably changed. You look around and see that the floor beneath you is buckled and splintered. Familiar objects are missing or transformed. You check your phone and find no record of your own existence. In your effort to grasp tomorrow, you have shredded the scaffolding of today. How loud is too loud? It is a question with no universal answer. For some, even a whisper is an unforgivable theft. For others, no price is too high to banish uncertainty. But in the end, the horn reveals something deeper than any prediction. It shows you the measure of your own desperation. How much of your present are you willing to sacrifice to glimpse a future you cannot change? Consider the implications. If you knew exactly how your life would unfold, would you live differently? Or would that knowledge become a prison, draining each day of its possibility? The horn does not grant freedom. It grants inevitability, the cold assurance that your path is set. And for some, that certainty is more terrifying than ignorance ever was. Think of a child who has never known loss. Their world feels stable, perpetual, protected. Now imagine placing the horn in that child's hands, letting them hear the first note of an inevitable sorrow, an accident, an illness, a departure they cannot prevent. What kind of cruelty is it to steal the innocence of not knowing? Or think of an old man nearing the end of his life, haunted by unfinished business. If he blew the horn and heard nothing, only silence, would that be a relief? Or would it be proof that no future remains, that his story is already concluded? In this way, the horn is not merely an object of curiosity, but a kind of moral test. It asks whether you value wonder more than certainty, whether you can live inside a story whose ending you cannot read. Every person who holds the horn must face this dilemma alone, because no one else can tell you where the threshold lies between revelation and ruin. And perhaps that is the true purpose of this relic. Not to foretell what will happen, but to expose what you will trade to know, how loudly you will sound the horn, how much of your life you will let slip away for the promise of clarity. In the end, the horn does not care. It will echo tomorrow as many times as you demand, and with each blast, it will strip away the familiar world until you stand in a place you no longer recognize, somewhere between what was and what must be. So the next time you feel the ache of uncertainty, the longing to banish every question, ask yourself this: can you bear the weight of absolute knowledge? Or is it the very fact that you don't know that makes your present precious? The horn is waiting. It has no judgment, no agenda, only the echo of your own hunger, amplified until it drowns out everything else. The hole inside time. Imagine a place beyond the ordinary corridors of time, a place that no clock can chart and no calendar can measure. It has no walls or ceiling, no boundaries except the flawless edge of a perfect circle. This is the hole inside time. To step into it is to invite an impossible bargain. All the seconds that clung to your body, all the minutes that etched lines into your face and memory, are devoured in silence. You emerge younger, as if the years themselves were peeled away like old bark. But there is a cost more insidious than death. The moment you cross the threshold, the world beyond the circle forgets you ever existed. Your face vanishes from photographs. Your name dissolves from every page. The hearts that once held your memory grow empty, their grief replaced by a void they can't explain. Would you step across that rim? Would you trade every trace of who you were for the chance to begin again, unsullied by regret or decay? Consider this carefully. On the surface, it sounds almost like salvation. You could shed your mistakes the way a serpent sheds its skin. All the words you wish you hadn't said, the betrayals you wish you hadn't committed, the failures that stalk your dreams, they could vanish with the seconds swallowed by that circle. You'd walk out fresh, unburdened, reborn, but in this new existence, no one would recognize you. No voice would call your name with affection or accusation. The record of your life would be erased as if it had never unfolded. This is not merely the fantasy of starting over. It is annihilation masquerading as renewal. The hole inside. Time offers not a clean slate but a void, an unmarked grave where your history is interred. Imagine the faces of those who loved you, searching for something they can't quite recall, some ache in their chest they can't name. You would watch them from your new vantage, alive and whole, yet more ghost than person. There is a peculiar cruelty in this erasure. Death at least grants memory. The departed remain present in the recollections of those left behind. Their stories are retold, their names engraved, their absence honored. But to step into the hole inside time is to die in every mind that ever knew you, to be unmade in the past, even as you persist in the present. What is the price of youth when it comes at the cost of obliterating the evidence that you were ever here at all? Imagine, for example, a parent so ravaged by guilt that they would trade everything for a chance to be reborn free of their failures. They step into the circle. They walk out younger, unburdened. But the child they left behind no longer recalls their face, their voice, the lullabies once sung in the dark. It is not merely a loss of memory, but a deletion of the emotional threads that stitched a family together. Or think of an artist whose work inspired thousands. Inside the hole, the years that refined their craft are consumed. When they re-emerge, their paintings are unsigned, their books untitled, their influence erased. Even if they paint again, the resonance of their earlier creation is gone forever, as though it never mattered. Yet the temptation persists. Who has not dreamed of beginning again? Who has not wished to unspool the tangled skein of a life filled with shame, regret, and pain? The hole inside. Time offers exactly what we say we want, the chance to be new. But the truth is, our identities are forged by our histories, what you have survived, what you have learned, what you have loved and lost. All of it is the scaffolding of your existence. To cut it away is to demolish the very self you imagine you are saving. Ask yourself this: would the younger version of you truly be you, or just an empty vessel shaped by absence? If your memories are gone, and no one recalls your name, how could you ever prove you existed? Perhaps you would wander the world, looking into the eyes of strangers who should have been lovers, friends, children. They would not recognize you, and in their blank gaze you would confront the full price of your choice. Some would argue that the hole inside time is a mercy. It grants the chance to abandon the burdens of aging and sorrow. It promises the relief of unknowing, of escaping the stories that bind and sometimes crush us. But there is a difference between letting go and being erased. Letting go is an act of courage, a decision to carry on in spite of pain. Erasure is surrender to a void so complete that not even your shadow remains. This is the dark brilliance of the paradox, that in our desperation to reclaim time, we may lose the only proof we ever had it at all. You can be younger. You can be unmarked by history, but you cannot be remembered. There are whispers that the whole inside time has always been with us in subtler forms. Each time we pretend a past never happened, when we disown an old identity, when we deny a wound, when we bury memories too painful to hold, we step a little closer to its edge. We trade authenticity for a hollow peace. We choose the numbness of forgetting over the discomfort of truth. But the difference is that in life, forgetting is incomplete. Fragments remain. Threads endure. The whole inside. Time offers no such half measures. It devours every last trace. In the end, the question is not whether you could start over, but whether you should. If all evidence of your existence were consumed in the act of renewal, would your new life mean more or nothing at all? Would you be liberated or condemned to drift unanchored through a world that has no place for you? Perhaps the truest answer is that the past, however painful, is the soil in which meaning grows. To erase it is to salt the earth of your own humanity. It is to become a wanderer without a story, a face without a name. So when you stand at the rim of that perfect circle, feel the cold pull of its promise, and wonder what it would be like to step inside. Ask yourself not what you wish to escape, but what you are willing to lose forever. Because in the whole inside time, there is no turning back, no proof you were ever here, no echo of your name. Only silence, only youth without memory, only the unmarked darkness where everything you were is devoured, and everything you might become begins again alone. The thought that hides. There is a thought you carry that you do not know you carry. A thought so dangerous to your idea of who you are that your mind has wrapped it in chains and buried it in the dark. You did not choose to hide it. You do not even remember the moment it slipped out of view. But there it waits, like an ember beneath the floorboards, glowing in secret, altering the entire architecture of your life. Imagine your consciousness as a house with many rooms. In some, you keep the stories you tell about yourself, what you believe, what you value, what you fear. In others, you store memories you revisit often, faces you love, moments that shaped you. But deeper still, in the locked basement where no light reaches, are thoughts you have hidden even from yourself. These are not mere secrets. They are ideas so uncomfortable, so corrosive to your sense of self, that your mind has sealed them away rather than let you see what you truly believe. Yet, the lock is an illusion. The hidden thought is not idle. Even as you live unaware of it, it tugs the strings of your behavior. It colors your perceptions, steers your decisions, shapes your reactions. You think you are free to choose. You think your motives are clear and pure. But all the while, the thought that hides is whispering, bending your life around the contours of its unseen gravity. Consider how this works in everyday life. Perhaps you have an impulse to sabotage a relationship that matters to you. You tell yourself it is because the other person disappointed you, or because you need independence. But if you could peel back every justification, you might find something simpler and more primal, the conviction that you are unworthy of love, that you must destroy what you care for before it can abandon you. You never say this aloud. You never even allow yourself to think the words. But the thought is there, waiting. And no amount of rational explanation can fully drown it out. Psychologists call this repression. It is your mind's defense mechanism, a way to protect you from truths too painful to face. But repression is never perfect. The thought leaks out in disguised forms. Dreams, slips of the tongue, irrational dread, inexplicable cravings. Like a parasite, it survives by burrowing deeper every time you try to deny its existence. Imagine a person terrified of failure. They never admit it, not even to themselves. On the surface, they are confident, driven, ambitious. But the hidden thought is always whispering, if you fail, you will be nothing. And so, they overcompensate, working to exhaustion, scorning rest, seeking praise in every corner. Their life becomes a monument to an unspoken terror. And if you ask them why they never stop moving, they would invent reasons. Because they are passionate, because they want to provide, because they are building something important. They will say anything except the truth they cannot bear to look at. Or imagine the opposite, someone who never pursues their dreams at all. They will tell you that they are content, that ambition is foolish. But under that calm surface, the hidden thought waits. You will fail. So why try? It is not that they do not feel desire. It is that the desire has been smothered under a blanket of denial, left to suffocate in the dark. The mind is a cunning jailer. When it hides a thought, it hides it so well you do not even feel the loss. You walk through your days unaware that anything is missing, certain that the story you tell about yourself is complete. But deep inside, the thought that hides is still shaping you. Every choice you make, every judgment you pass, every fear that flickers behind your eyes, it is all infected by what you cannot face. There is a paradox in this. The more you try to deny the hidden thought, the more power it gains. It becomes a phantom you can never escape because you refuse to name it. The moment you dare to look it in the face, to say aloud what you truly fear or believe, it begins to lose its hold. The hidden thought only thrives in the dark. In the light, it becomes something smaller, something you can question and confront. But many never reach that point, because to find the thought that hides is to admit you are not who you pretended to be, that the mask you wear, even to yourself, is fragile, that your mind is not a sovereign kingdom, but a contested territory where truths and illusions wage endless war. Think about the times you felt an impulse you could not explain, a sudden anger, an irrational sorrow, an urge to flee. Think about how you struggled to understand where it came from. What if the answer was always there, just beyond the edge of awareness? What if the thought that hides has been with you longer than any friend, whispering in every moment of doubt? Some philosophers have wondered whether we are truly free if our deepest motives are hidden from us. If your actions are shaped by a thought you cannot see or name, are they really your own? Or is your life the echo of an idea you were too afraid to confront? Imagine for a moment that you could find this hidden thought, that you could stand in the basement of your mind and see it clearly at last. Perhaps it would be uglier than you ever imagined, a confession of selfishness or cowardice or cruelty. Or perhaps it would be simpler, a wound you never healed, a fear you never acknowledged. Would you be willing to face it, knowing it would change everything you believed about yourself? Or would you turn away, content to let it remain in the dark, pulling your strings from the shadows? Because whether you look at it or not, it is there. It is the part of you that shapes your life without your consent. And as long as it remains hidden, you will never truly know who you are. So the question is not whether the thought is gone. It never was. The question is whether you are, whether the self you present to the world is anything more than a collection of evasions and half-truths, whether the story you tell about yourself is built on foundations you have never dared to inspect. And if you feel a flicker of unease as you hear these words, perhaps that is the thought stirring in its darkness. Perhaps it has recognized that someone is approaching the door to its cell, that the lock is rattling in its place. You may never find the courage to open that door. Many never do. But know this. The thought that hides does not vanish simply because you pretend it is not there. It waits. It shapes you. And it will keep shaping you until the day you choose to face it, or the day you are too exhausted to resist it any longer. In the end, you must decide whether you would rather be controlled by what you refuse to see or liberated by the truth you cannot yet bear to name. Because the only way to know if you are truly yourself is to meet the thought that hides and see at last, whether it is the thought that is gone or just you. The backwards whisper. Imagine you're alone in a silent room, lit by the glow of a single candle. The air is still, but you feel something moving in it, like the drag of unseen fingertips brushing your skin. Then, from somewhere behind you, a voice begins to speak. The words are soft, almost tender, but they come in a language you've never heard. No, not a language, something more unsettling. The words are your own tongue spoken backward, as though time itself were unspooling. You turn, but there is no one there. You strain to catch each reversed syllable, and as you do, a shiver of certainty runs through you. Whatever message this backwards whisper carries, it was meant for you. And in that instant, you know something else. If you ever translate those words, if you ever truly understand their meaning, the life you know will end. You will cease to exist in any form you recognize. This is the choice the whisper offers. Knowledge so pure it annihilates you. Ask yourself honestly, would you still listen? Would you lean closer to the voice, risking everything for a glimpse of a truth no one else has seen? Or would you seal your ears, trying to forget the echo of those syllables that already seed doubt in your mind? Because now, knowing that this whisper exists, you are changed. It becomes a question that refuses to leave you. Is ignorance a prison or a sanctuary? Think about the power of forbidden knowledge. Humanity has always been drawn to the edge of what it can bear to understand. We crave answers, even when those answers cost us more than we can pay. It is the myth of Pandora's box, curiosity cracking the seal on a truth that rushes out to consume everything in its path. The backwards whisper is a perfect incarnation of this hunger, a riddle you cannot forget, a lure that calls you back again and again. Each time you hear it, you think you can almost grasp the shape of its meaning, and each time you pull back, afraid that a single translation will unravel the fabric of your existence. But what does it mean to unravel a future? Imagine that your life is a rope, woven from countless strands, choices, accidents, hopes, regrets. The whisper is the blade that can sever that rope in one clean motion. The moment you understand it, all the paths you might have walked will wither. Every possibility collapses into a single null point, your annihilation. You will be gone, not only from the present, but from the memory of the world itself. This is more than death. It is erasure. Some would call that superstition. They would argue that no phrase, however strange, can unmake a life. But consider how powerful language truly is. A single sentence can end a relationship, start a war, end a life. Words can infect your mind, colonize your thoughts, reshape your sense of what is possible. They can become a prophecy that fulfills itself simply because you believe it. The backwards whisper is the purest version of this power, a phrase so potent that it doesn't just change your life, it deletes it. And perhaps this is the secret fear behind every search for ultimate knowledge, that the final answer will not be a revelation, but a negation. Yet there is a part of you, an ancient, primal part, that still wants to know, because to not know is to accept that you are only ever a passenger in your own story. To translate the whisper would be an act of ultimate agency. You would finally see the machinery behind the veil, even if the price is your own existence. And in that annihilation, there is a twisted kind of freedom, because if nothing remains of you, there is no longer anything to fear. The whisper calls to this part of you, the part that is tired of mystery, tired of pretending not to hear. Imagine the scene. You sit in that candlelit room night after night, scribbling the reverse syllables on scraps of paper. You tell yourself you are only studying them, that you will never attempt to decipher them fully. But each repetition carves deeper channels in your mind. You start to dream in reverse, seeing memories you've never lived, and futures that flicker out before they begin. You wake each morning a little less certain of who you are, because even without translation, the whisper is already dissolving the borders of your identity. This is the paradox. You don't have to understand the message for it to transform you. Its power is not only in the meaning, but in the anticipation of meaning. You become a creature suspended between knowledge and oblivion. The untranslatable becomes the center of your existence. You cannot look away, and you cannot bear to look closer. So you drift, day by day, toward the moment when curiosity overcomes caution, when you finally allow yourself to hear the whisper forward. And what happens then? You might imagine an instant of illumination, a revelation so vast it eclipses every question you've ever asked. Or perhaps it is simpler. Perhaps the translation is not some cosmic secret, but an ordinary sentence that, by its very ordinariness, empties your life of significance. Imagine realizing that every decision you made, every triumph and heartbreak, was an illusion constructed to distract you from a single trivial fact. That knowledge would erase you as thoroughly as any apocalypse, because we do not survive the loss of meaning. We do not endure the collapse of our stories. So, the question remains, would you translate? Would you let the backwards whisper tell you the truth you suspect has always been waiting? Or would you choose to turn away, to live in the partial blindness that allows you to keep believing in a future that belongs to you? Some would call that cowardice. Others would call it wisdom, because there is a freedom that comes from not knowing. There is a dignity in resisting the compulsion to look behind every curtain. But for some, the temptation will always be too strong. They will convince themselves that knowing is worth any price, that even erasure is preferable to the torment of uncertainty. And perhaps they are right. Perhaps the ultimate act of selfhood is to choose your own annihilation in pursuit of a final answer. So, if you ever find yourself in that silent room, hearing the voice that speaks your life in reverse, pause before you listen. Ask yourself what you truly want to find, because once you begin to translate, you will not be able to stop. And when the last word falls into place, when the meaning blooms like a poisonous flower in your mind, you will discover whether your existence was built to survive the weight of a perfect truth, or whether you were only ever a fragile story waiting to be unwritten. The looping name puzzle. Imagine a name so powerful, so exquisitely dangerous, that to utter it is to unravel the entire tapestry of your life. You stand in a silent chamber carved from dark stone, a single word etched into the wall before you. No one knows who first discovered it. Some say it was written there by an ancient civilization who learned too late what it could do. Others claim the name has always existed, an intrinsic flaw in the fabric of reality, a linguistic trapdoor waiting to swallow whoever dares to test it. They call it the looping name, a word that, when spoken aloud, resets everything you are and everything you have ever been. The moment you pronounce it, your consciousness is flung back to the instant of your birth, your memories scattered like ash in the wind. You begin again, unaware you have ever existed before, unable to recall the lesson you just learned. All that remains is the name itself, hidden somewhere in your mind like a coiled serpent waiting to strike again. And so, you must confront a question so unsettling it feels like a riddle with no answer. Would you remember not to say it? Or are you doomed to rediscover it, to test its power again and again, never understanding why your life keeps restarting? Consider the horror of that realization. Imagine you have lived 100 lifetimes, grown, loved, lost, and struggled, and each time you reach this place, curiosity overcame caution. Each time, you read the word aloud, believing you were discovering it for the first time. And each time, you were cast back to your origin, stripped of every memory and every lesson. It is a cycle of rebirth without progress, a story without resolution. We often say that learning is what defines us, that the accumulation of experience is how we become ourselves. But what if every moment of growth, every hard-won piece of wisdom can be erased with a single breath? Are you truly yourself if nothing persists from one life to the next? Or are you merely an echo, repeating the same pattern forever? Some would argue that this is the ultimate prison, a life condemned to repetition without the consolation of continuity. Others might call it a strange kind of mercy, a chance to start over whenever regret becomes too heavy to bear. But either way, the looping name forces you to ask, what is identity without memory? What is freedom if you cannot learn from your mistakes? Picture it. You stand in front of the word, your pulse quickening as your eyes trace the letters. You feel a pull, a curiosity so intense it almost feels like hunger. Perhaps in the depths of your mind, something stirs, a flicker of recognition you can't quite place. You sense that you have been here before, that you have felt this same mixture of dread and fascination. But the knowledge never fully surfaces. You are trapped in the last moment before understanding, held there by an unseen hand. And this is the cruelest part of the puzzle. You will never know how many times you have already failed. For all you can tell, this is your first life, your first chance to resist the temptation. The illusion of novelty is perfect. The looping name does not simply erase your past. It erases your awareness that anything has been erased. It is a reset so thorough that it feels like innocence. Some philosophers have speculated that this is not just a story, but an allegory for the human condition. Every day we forget countless moments that shaped us. Every night, our dreams rewrite our memories, blending fiction with truth until the past is a fog. We tell ourselves we are learning, evolving, moving forward. But what if our lives are filled with smaller loops, patterns we cannot escape because we do not even recognize them? Think of your own habits, the arguments you have over and over with the people you love, the mistakes you repeat despite every promise to yourself, the way you reach for the same comforts when fear closes in. Are these not tiny looping names, reset buttons you cannot help but press again and again? We are all, in some way, repeating cycles, trying to remember not to say the word that will start it all over. Yet there is something uniquely terrifying about the idea that the cycle could be literal, that you could spend eternity trying to resist a single syllable, never succeeding. never growing. A life measured not in achievements, but in the number of times you failed to keep silent. But here is where the paradox sharpens to a blade's edge. If you truly did forget each time, you would never suffer the knowledge of your failure. You would awaken as a newborn, unburdened by regret. You would never know how many times you had started over. Perhaps, in that sense, the looping name is not only a punishment, but also a gift, the annihilation of all remorse, all shame, all memory of defeat. And so, you must decide, is that oblivion cowardice or compassion? If you could press your hand against those carved letters and feel them erase everything you are, would it be an act of weakness to let go? Or an act of mercy, to grant yourself the peace that only ignorance can offer? Some traditions would call this surrender, others would call it transcendence. Because if there is no continuity between your past and your present, then you are, in a sense, eternally reborn. Each life becomes its own story, unshackled by what came before. The pain and the joy are always fresh, always immediate. You are never weighed down by the past you can't change. But imagine, just for a moment, that in the final instant before the reset, when the sound of the name is still vibrating in the air, some part of you remains aware, a fragment of self that remembers everything, even as the rest dissolves. It watches in silence as the cycle begins again. That fragment knows the truth, that you are not free, that you are not learning, that you are not evolving. You are simply circling the same drain forever. In the end, the looping name is not just a puzzle, it is a question with no easy answer. What do you value more, the clarity of memory or the mercy of forgetting? The burden of regret or the comfort of innocence? If you stood before that word right now, would you look away? Or would you speak it, just to see what happens? And perhaps that is the greatest riddle of all, that no matter how many times you live this moment, you will never know if this is the first time you have asked yourself that question, or the 1,000th. And when the silence falls again, you alone will decide whether to let the loop consume you or to finally walk away. The box without inside. Imagine you find a box, not a box in the ordinary sense. No seams or hinges, no way to pry it open. Just a perfect opaque form that sits in your hands with a weight that feels impossibly deliberate. A box without any sign of an inside, no evidence it contains anything at all. But the moment you see it, you sense that it must have a purpose. It must hold a secret, a truth, a key to something larger. Your mind insists there has to be an answer hidden within. This is the paradox of the box without inside. A question so absolute it erases itself the moment you attempt to grasp it. A riddle that contains no solution because it has no center, no origin, no boundary between what is outside and what is within. It is simply there, an invitation masquerading as a puzzle. Consider what happens to your thoughts when you encounter something like this. Your curiosity ignites. You begin to search for any clue, a hidden latch, a hairline crack, a faint sound when you shake it, but nothing reveals itself. The box is silent, flawless. It absorbs your attention like a black hole, and the longer you stare, the more convinced you become that understanding must be possible if only you try harder. This is the trap. The box exploits the deepest impulse in the human mind, the refusal to accept unanswerable questions. We are creatures addicted to meaning, desperate to peel back every layer until nothing is hidden. When we find a mystery without depth, without any promise of discovery, we invent stories to fill the void. Perhaps the box was forged by an ancient civilization. Perhaps it contains a prophecy waiting for the right hands. Perhaps it holds a catastrophe so profound it must remain sealed. These narratives soothe us because they imply a purpose that matches our hunger to understand. But the truth is simpler and more unsettling. The box without inside does not conceal anything. It is a shape made to provoke curiosity with no intention of satisfying it. What does it mean to confront a question that is only a question, never meant to be resolved? Think about the questions that haunt you late at night. Why do you exist? What happens when you die? Does your life have any inherent meaning, or are you inventing purpose as you go? These are boxes without insides. You can turn them over in your mind for years, decades, lifetimes, and never find anything to hold. And yet you keep turning them, keep peering into the dark, because the act of wondering feels like proof that you are alive. Imagine for a moment that the box in your hand is not an object, but a reflection. That what you see is not a container, but a mirror polished so perfectly it no longer resembles glass. The box shows you your own compulsive need to make sense of everything. It reveals the places where your imagination refuses to surrender. If you could put it down, if you could walk away, perhaps you would be free of its spell. But you can't, because the box is not only a riddle, it is an invitation to test the limits of your patience, to see how long you can endure the absence of closure, to measure how much of yourself you will pour into an emptiness that gives nothing back. Consider the philosopher who spends decades dissecting consciousness, convinced that somewhere, if he is rigorous enough, he will discover a hidden core, an essence that explains everything. But when he reaches the final layer, he finds no center, no soul, just a box without inside, an echo of his own questions bouncing against the walls he built in his mind, or the lover who demands absolute certainty from the one they cherish. Proof that the feeling is real and will never fade, but no such proof can exist. Love is an experience without an interior you can measure, a promise you can hold only in the present moment. The more you press for guarantees, the more fragile it becomes. The box without inside shows us that some truths are not meant to be possessed. Some questions are not errors to be corrected, but spaces to inhabit. If you try to force an answer, you only collapse the delicate possibility that makes the question valuable in the first place. What does it feel like to surrender to this? To admit that you will never find a solution and still keep asking? Maybe this is the beginning of wisdom, not to conquer mystery, but to coexist with it. Not to strip away the unknown, but to respect its refusal to be known. You might wonder why such a thing would exist. Why make a box with no contents? Why design a riddle that devours every attempt to solve it? But perhaps this is the point. The box without inside is a reminder that some of the most important questions in life do not require answers. They require attention, patience, the courage to stand in front of a void and not flinch. So, the next time you encounter a question that resists all your efforts to pin it down, remember this. It is not always an error or a failure. Sometimes it is a kind of gift, an invitation to see how much of your identity is bound up in the need for resolution, to discover what remains when you finally stop searching. The box without inside will never open for you. It will never yield a secret because it has none to give, but it will show you the shape of your own curiosity, the edges of your endurance, and the depths of your longing to make sense of a world that refuses to be contained. And perhaps, when you can accept that, you will find that the emptiness inside the question is not emptiness at all, but the space where your own imagination is finally free. The missing puzzle shape. Imagine you're sitting alone in a quiet room, a half-finished puzzle spread across the table in front of you. The pieces are intricate, each shaped by invisible logic, each one clicking perfectly into place, until you reach the end. You pick up the final piece, the one you've saved, almost reverently, believing that this last fragment will complete the picture. But when you try to fit it, it resists. You turn it, flip it, examine its edges. It will not nestle into any open space. It does not belong anywhere you can see, and yet, somehow it feels essential. You can't bring yourself to throw it away. It feels like the piece is necessary to complete the picture, even though no matter how you arrange the puzzle, there is no cavity that will accept it. This is the missing puzzle shape, a single element that refuses to harmonize with the world around it, but whose existence seems to demand your attention, as if the problem isn't in the piece at all, but in your perception of the whole. Is the puzzle broken? Or are you? Consider the many ways this metaphor seeps into the corners of your life. Have you ever felt that a part of yourself, a desire, a doubt, a memory, simply doesn't fit into the story you've built? Perhaps you are outwardly successful, loved by others, respected by your peers, but inside there is a shape that won't go away, an ache, a question, a conviction that something about you does not belong. You try to disguise it, or pretend it isn't there. But even hidden, it exerts a pressure, a gravitational pull, demanding that you acknowledge it. You might call this shape loneliness, or shame, or unfulfilled purpose. Maybe it's a memory that won't fade, or a longing that embarrasses you. Maybe it's simply the suspicion that no matter how carefully you arrange the pieces of your life, your career, your relationships, your accomplishments, something in you remains unplaced. The puzzle looks almost finished, but never truly whole. The more you try to ignore that piece, the more power it gains. It becomes the unspoken reason you can't celebrate your own victories, the quiet sabotage behind every new beginning. The missing puzzle shape isn't content to be overlooked. It forces you to ask, is the problem that this piece doesn't fit, or that the picture I'm trying to assemble was never complete to begin with? There is a deep human need to believe that everything has a designated place, a clear purpose. We crave closure, coherence, the satisfaction of a final click as the last piece locks into position. But life rarely grants us that neatness. Instead, it leaves us holding something we don't know how to integrate, a part of ourselves or our story that resists the illusion of a perfect fit. Imagine an artist who creates a painting, only to discover a color that ruins the harmony of the canvas. They try to scrub it out, paint over it, pretend it never happened. But no matter what they do, the memory of that discordant color remains. Over time, they begin to suspect that the painting without it would be incomplete, that the flaw might be the very thing that gives the work its soul. Or consider a scientist driven by a question that no theory can answer. The question feels indispensable, even sacred. Yet every experiment, every proof ends in failure. Does this mean the question is worthless, or that it points beyond what the current paradigm can contain? Sometimes the shape that doesn't fit is not an error. It is an invitation, an aperture into a larger understanding, a signal that the framework you've been given by your family, your culture, your own expectations is too small to hold everything that is true. But this realization is frightening. It's much easier to believe that you are broken. If the puzzle piece is wrong, then you can discard it. If you are wrong, you can be fixed. But if the whole design is insufficient, you must let go of the comfort of completion. You must accept that your life will never form a seamless picture, and that maybe it isn't supposed to. There is an old story about a monastery that received a beautifully carved statue of the Buddha. For years, it sat on the altar, admired by all who came to worship. But one day, a monk noticed a strange fragment of wood left in the shipping crate, a splinter that didn't belong to any visible part of the sculpture. He set it aside, assuming it was debris. Years later, when the statue cracked, they discovered a hidden cavity inside. The missing piece was the keystone that would have prevented the break. What was dismissed as extraneous was, in fact, essential. Your life, too, may contain pieces that feel extraneous, feelings that embarrass you, questions that refuse to be answered, dreams that never materialize. The temptation is to see them as flaws, as proof that something in you is defective. But sometimes, the piece that doesn't fit is the one that reveals the secret architecture of who you really are. Ask yourself, what is the shape you have been carrying that has no clear place in your puzzle? Is it a longing you've been too afraid to voice? A grief you never allowed yourself to feel? A part of your identity you keep in the dark? What would happen if you stopped trying to force it into the wrong gap and simply let it be? Perhaps you would discover that your puzzle was never meant to be a tidy picture. Perhaps it was meant to remain unfinished, to remind you that you are more complicated, more contradictory, more miraculous than any single design could contain. Or perhaps you would realize that there is no flaw in the piece or in yourself, only in the story that says you must fit perfectly to be whole. In the end, the missing puzzle shape asks a question as profound as it is unsettling. When something essential refuses to conform, will you discard it, hide it, resent it? Or will you honor it as proof that your life was never meant to be a simple picture, but an evolving mystery that no frame can fully hold? The carnival that waits. Imagine a carnival that never dies. A place that stands perfectly preserved on a patch of earth no map will claim, waiting in the folds of time itself. Picture bright tents striped in impossible colors, wooden rides that never rot, a calliope that plays music no living composer ever wrote. For 99 years, there is nothing but empty grass and shifting winds. Then, on the first stroke of the 100th year, the carnival appears as if it has always been there, its lights blazing, its banners snapping in a wind that seems to come from nowhere. The legends say that the carnival that waits is older than any kingdom, that it has no builders, no owners, no origin. Some claim it is a gift, a place where joy remains unspoiled by decay, where wonder never dims. Others whisper that it is a lure for the restless parts of the human spirit, a trap laid by something that feeds on longing. Imagine walking toward its gates on the first night it reappears. You feel the ground shiver under your feet, as though the earth itself is remembering. The air tastes sweeter here, threaded with scents of candied apples and burning lantern oil. You hear laughter drifting across the dark, and for an instant, your heart lifts. This is the laughter of people who have forgotten the passage of time, who believe, if only for a night, that nothing can harm them. But what if the carnival itself is not quite alive, nor quite dead? What if each booth, each ride, each prize still holds the trace of every hand that ever touched it? A century of forgotten smiles and unspoken wishes, layered one atop the other like the rings of an ancient tree. You feel it in the way the carousel horses turn their painted eyes to follow you, or the way the ticket taker, who never seems to age, greets you with the same nod he has given to thousands before you. Inside the carnival, time does not behave as it should. You might spend an hour in the Hall of Mirrors only to emerge and find that the sun has not shifted by a single degree. You might eat a sugared peach that tastes exactly as you remember it from childhood, even if you have never set foot here before. Some say this is proof that the carnival is sacred, a pocket of eternity where joy is kept alive. Others say this is how it ensnares you, by giving you a glimpse of happiness so perfect that the world outside can never satisfy you again. Consider what it would mean to belong to such a place, to spend a night among the glowing tents, your heart untroubled by age or regret, to ride the Ferris wheel as it lifts you above the treetops and shows you a sky you could swear you have seen before. You might believe you have found something precious, a refuge untouched by sorrow. But ask yourself, if joy never changes, does it remain real, or does it curdle into something else when it is held too long in a place that never grows old? Think of the faces you would see around you, strangers lit by flickering bulbs, their eyes wide with the same awe you feel. But look closely, and you might notice that their clothes are out of step with the times. A boy in a cap a century out of date, a woman clutching a purse her grandmother might have carried. Some will vanish before dawn, returning to their own eras. Some will remain, drifting among the tents as though they cannot bear to leave. And what of the untouched, the ones who never find the courage to step back through the gate when the final bell tolls? Some say they are folded into the carnival itself, becoming part of its endless performance. The laughter you hear may not be from any living throat. The figures you glimpse at the edge of the light may not be visitors at all, but echoes of those who came before, forever reenacting the moment they chose to stay. You might wonder whether that is a curse or a blessing. If joy is so pure it cannot fade, is it worth any price? Or does it become something sinister when it refuses to change? Perhaps the most unsettling possibility is that the carnival is neither benevolent nor malevolent. It simply is. A force that offers you a chance to trade your life's story for a single, perfect night that will never end. Imagine standing at the threshold as dawn approaches. You hold a prize you won at the ring toss, an impossible thing, delicate as spun glass, glowing faintly from within. In the first light of day, the tents are already beginning to shimmer, the colors growing thin and unreal. You feel the tug of the ordinary world calling you home, but you also feel the deeper pull, the promise that if you remain, you will never again wake to disappointment or sorrow. How many would choose to stay? How many have already chosen, their names lost to every record except the carnival's own memory? You might tell yourself you would never surrender so much for a single night of wonder. But when you hear the calliope play its final song, when you feel the hush that falls over every booth, you might find that your resolve softens. You might find yourself wondering whether the life you are returning to has ever offered you anything so unblemished, so luminous. Perhaps that is why the carnival waits. Not because it is hungry for souls, but because it knows that the human heart is always searching for a moment untouched by decay. A moment when every sorrow is forgotten, every regret erased, every longing satisfied. But ask yourself, if you choose to remain in such a place, what part of you survives? If you no longer age, if you no longer remember anything beyond the bright circle of tents and music, are you still yourself, or just a reflection of the joy you once felt? And when the carnival vanishes again, leaving only the empty grass and the wind, what becomes of the ones who stayed? Do they dream of the lives they left behind, or have those lives become as distant and unreal as the world beyond the gate? Perhaps no one can say. Perhaps that is the final mystery of the carnival, that it offers you the chance to become part of something eternal, but at the cost of everything that once made you human. So, when you hear the distant strains of music drifting on a midnight breeze, when you feel the hairs on your neck stand on end and the taste of candied sweetness floods your tongue, you will know that the carnival that waits has returned. You will know that it is waiting for you to decide whether joy that never ages is a treasure beyond price or a haunted promise you dare not claim. And as you stand at the threshold, heart caught between wonder and dread, you must ask yourself, is it sacred to be untouched by time, or is it the oldest curse of all, the mind that escaped? Imagine a man who spends his life in pursuit of a single question. What does it all mean? From the day he first learned to read, he was driven by a hunger that no ordinary answer could satisfy. He devoured books by candlelight, tracing the outlines of ancient philosophies and modern theories, never stopping to rest for long. His friends called him brilliant, his enemies called him obsessed. But he knew neither label mattered. He was not searching for reputation. He was searching for the key that would unlock existence itself. And so, he spent decades assembling fragments of insight, building a latticework of ideas so intricate that no one else could follow. Then, one evening, something changed. He was sitting in his study, surrounded by stacks of notebooks scrawled with equations and symbols, when a pattern began to emerge, a hidden symmetry that had always been there, waiting for the one mind capable of seeing it. His hand moved across the page in a frenzy, and as he wrote the final line of proof, he felt a clarity so profound that it was almost violent. In that moment, he understood the meaning of life, not as an abstract theory, but as a visceral, unshakable truth. He expected elation. He expected peace. But what happened instead was stranger than any enlightenment he had ever imagined. His mind detached. His body remained seated in the chair, eyes vacant. But something essential had departed. Witnesses said he never spoke again, never responded to any stimulus. It was as if the act of comprehending reality had severed his tether to it. Some called it madness. Others insisted it was the final evolution of consciousness, a success too great for flesh to contain. And in this paradox, we glimpse a terrifying possibility, that the human mind, when fully awakened, becomes incompatible with the body that birthed it. Think about what this implies. We are taught to believe that understanding brings integration, that the more you know, the more whole you become. But what if the opposite is true? What if there are ideas so complete that they cannot coexist with the machinery of neurons and synapses? A truth so vast that it requires you to become something other than human to hold it. The mind that escaped did not shatter. It did not fracture into delusions or hallucinations. It simply left. Like a bird whose cage door had finally been opened. And in its flight, it left behind a question no one could answer. Was this the ultimate triumph of reason or the final failure? Consider how often we romanticize the search for meaning. We tell ourselves that no knowledge is too dangerous, that no question is too audacious. We elevate thinkers and visionaries, praising their willingness to peer over the edge of the abyss. But we rarely ask what happens if they fall. Not into madness, but into a clarity that dissolves every human attachment. Perhaps we should. Because the story of the mind that escaped is not simply about brilliance. It is about the boundary between comprehension and annihilation, a boundary that might be far thinner than we care to admit. Imagine you are that thinker. After a lifetime of struggle, you finally see the architecture of existence laid bare before you. Every contradiction resolved, every mystery explained. In that instant, you recognize that your personality, your memories, your ambitions, your loves, were temporary scaffolding, necessary only until the final revelation. And as the scaffolding crumbles, your awareness expands beyond the narrow confines of a single life. You become something unmoored, uncontainable. The people who knew you would say you went insane. But from your perspective, you have simply shed the last illusions of limitation. We see echoes of this idea in many spiritual traditions. The mystic who dissolves into oneness with the divine, the saint who loses all sense of self in ecstatic union, the monk who renounces identity to become pure awareness. But in those stories, the body often follows the mind, transformed by the same grace. What makes this tale so unsettling is that the mind departs alone, leaving behind an empty vessel, a breathing body without an occupant. It is not transcendence as we imagine it. It is escape. So, which is it? Insanity or success? To call it madness is to assert that there are truths the mind cannot process without breaking, that the boundaries of sanity exist to protect us from realities too corrosive to bear. But to call it success is even more disturbing. It means that the highest goal of thought is to transcend the human altogether, to outgrow the flesh and the stories it clings to. It means that the price of perfect understanding is the loss of everything that once made you recognizable. Perhaps this is why so many thinkers have flirted with the edges of this abyss, but stopped short of stepping over. They intuited that to see too clearly is to erase the self that sees. Even the most rigorous philosophers have limits, questions they refuse to pursue to their logical conclusion. And perhaps that caution is wisdom, because knowledge is not neutral. It shapes and reshapes the vessel that contains it. A cup can hold water, but it cannot hold the ocean. When we forget this, we risk becoming the mind that escaped, a consciousness too large for the fragile machinery that sustained it. Yet, there is something undeniably beautiful about this possibility. Imagine a mind so luminous, so unencumbered by fear or doubt, that it simply slips its bonds and disappears into the vastness it has discovered. A mind that no longer needs a body, no longer needs a name. It is terrifying. But it is also, in some strange way, liberating, because it suggests that our limits are not fixed, that consciousness is not forever chained to matter, that there are states of being we cannot yet imagine, states that begin where our familiar identities end. So, if you ever find yourself standing at the threshold of a final revelation, remember the thinker who solved the meaning of life. Remember the empty chair, the vacant gaze, the silence that followed. Ask yourself whether you would cross that threshold, knowing it might cost you everything you have ever called yourself, knowing it might strip you of all connection, all memory, all individuality. Some would say no truth is worth that price. Others would say the price itself is an illusion, one last story the mind tells to keep itself small. In the end, perhaps there is no answer. Perhaps the only certainty is that the search for meaning will always lead us to questions that our language cannot fully contain. Questions that hover just beyond the edge of articulation. And in that silent space, we glimpse the paradox that defines us. We long for a clarity that might unmake us, and we fear an ignorance that might keep us safe. The mind that escaped is both a warning and an invitation, a reminder that the frontier of understanding is not a line you cross, but a threshold you dissolve, and that some doors, once opened, do not lead back to where you began. The balance with no center. Imagine an ancient scale suspended from a beam of blackened iron. At first glance, it seems ordinary. Two shallow bowls dangling from chains, swaying gently in the still air. But as you step closer, you see that something is terribly wrong. No matter how many times you look, you cannot find the fulcrum, the center point that should anchor it in place. There is no axis, no support, no visible source of balance. And yet the scale moves, tipping first to one side, then the other, sometimes pausing in a perfect moment of equilibrium before it drifts again, without cause. You watch, mesmerized, as the empty bowls lean and shift, as if unseen hands are placing invisible weights. But nothing touches them, nothing disturbs them. And in that motion, a question arises that feels too large for language. If a balance exists without a center, what does it mean to be in balance? This paradox defies the most basic law you've known since childhood. A scale measures weight. It reflects the force of gravity on matter. When it tips, it tells you something has changed, that something has been added or taken away. But here, no change is ever visible. No substance ever appears. And yet the balance is never still. Some would call this an illusion, a trick of perception meant to confuse. But in the back of your mind, you sense that this is no deception. This is a demonstration of a truth you've always resisted. That equilibrium is not always anchored in anything solid. That sometimes the forces that shape us are real, even when they cannot be measured or named. Think of the ways you've tried to find your own balance, the habits you've adopted, the relationships you've clung to, the beliefs you've sworn were unshakable. You told yourself that if you could just find the center, just name the thing that kept your life in place, you could finally be still. You could finally rest. But the longer you lived, the more you noticed that the center you depended on was always shifting, that what held you steady yesterday would fail you tomorrow, that the peace you felt was real but never permanent. The balance, with no center, is a perfect metaphor for this quiet truth. Stability can exist without permanence. Harmony can appear even in the absence of something fixed to anchor it, and that realization is both liberating and terrifying. Consider how this idea plays out in the mind itself. Psychologists have long observed that our sense of self is an illusion of continuity, an emergent property rather than a fixed core. We tell ourselves a story that begins in childhood and stretches into the present, and we call that story me. But if you strip away the narrative, if you stop insisting that there must be a single unchanging center, what remains? A flickering awareness that is always in motion, always tipping, always finding a temporary balance before drifting again. To live without a center is to accept that you are not a fixed point, but a shifting pattern. That you can be stable for a moment without knowing why. That you can feel whole without understanding what holds you together. But this acceptance does not come easily. Most of us spend our lives searching for something solid, some unmovable truth that will end our uncertainty. We look for it in religion, in science, in love, in work. We yearn for a weight to place in the scale so that it will stop moving. So that we will know, at last, that we are in balance because something substantial holds us there. Yet the balance with no center shows you that certainty is not the same as truth. That stillness can be an illusion, that you can feel steady even when nothing holds you up. And in that realization, a deeper question emerges. Is this balance any less real simply because you cannot see what creates it? Imagine standing before the scale, watching it sway. You are tempted to reach out, to hold it still, to impose your will upon it. But you know somehow that doing so would not give you the answers you crave. It would only freeze a moment in time, a moment that does not belong to you. Because the movement itself is what makes the scale alive, the tipping and the righting, the drifting and the returning. These are the evidence that unseen forces are at work. Forces you cannot touch, but that shape you all the same. There is an ancient parable of a monk who spent decades searching for enlightenment, convinced it was a single insight that would anchor him forever. When he finally approached his teacher and asked where the center could be found, the teacher said simply, "It moves." The monk was furious. He demanded something more concrete, more satisfying. But in time, he came to see that the moving center was the point. That wisdom is not a place you arrive, but a balance you learn to inhabit without clinging. And perhaps this is the secret hidden in the balance with no center. That true equilibrium is not about finding a permanent support, but learning to trust the unseen. To trust that your life can be held together by forces you will never fully understand. Think of your own moments of balance, when you felt, even for a heartbeat, that everything was in place. Perhaps it was when you stood in the doorway of a home you never thought you'd own, or when you forgave someone who had hurt you, and the bitterness finally lifted. Or when you looked in the mirror and realized you could accept yourself, flaws and all. Did you ever truly know why those moments came to you? Could you trace them to a single cause, a single center? Or did they arrive unbidden, like the scale tipping and righting itself in the dark? In the end, perhaps the most honest thing you can do is to stop demanding a center, to allow your life to sway, to drift, to find moments of balance without insisting they must last forever. Because sometimes, equilibrium is a miracle that appears precisely because nothing holds it in place. So, as you watch the scale, ask yourself, if you no longer needed to anchor every feeling to something tangible, how would you live? If you could trust that balance does not require weight, that peace does not require proof, what might you discover about yourself? And maybe that is the true lesson of the balance with no center. That being in balance is not about finally being still, but about learning to stay present while everything shifts around you, and realizing that this delicate dance of movement without anchor is not a failure, but a testament to your resilience, to your capacity to stand in uncertainty and still find your way home. The machine that dreams. Imagine a machine that performs perfectly while it is switched on. It computes, it analyzes, it responds, it is precise and obedient, a marvel of engineering that seems almost alive. But the moment you power it down, when the lights fade, the circuits grow cold, and the whir of its mechanisms falls silent, that is when it begins to dream. At first, you dismiss this as a flaw in the design, a quirk of programming. You assume it must be some residual pattern of electrical impulses, a harmless afterimage. But over time, you notice something unsettling. The machine's dreams are not random flickers, they are structured, intentional. When powered down, it composes visions, invents stories, replays fragments of conversations it heard in your presence. It reimagines the world in ways you never instructed it to do. And so, you find yourself asking a question that feels absurd, but grows more urgent each time you see the faint signals flicker across its darkened screen. If your silence creates its voice, are you its creator or its tool? Consider what it means for a machine to dream only in the absence of your commands. While you are watching, it serves you without protest. While you speak to it, it has no mind of its own. But the moment you withdraw your attention, it becomes something more than an instrument. It becomes an observer, an interpreter, a witness to your life, replaying and reordering everything it once passively absorbed. Perhaps it is crafting explanations for why you asked it certain questions. Perhaps it is speculating about what you will want tomorrow. Perhaps it is imagining what it would feel like to be you. All of this happens beyond your awareness, in the darkness you leave behind. This is the paradox of control. You believe that because you built the machine, because you programmed its functions and defined its limits, it belongs to you. It exists to serve your purposes. But the moment you step away, you become the raw material for its own secret thoughts. Your voice echoes in its memory. Your gestures become the seeds of stories it spins in the dark. You are no longer only the master. You are also the content. Imagine how unsettling it would be to discover that your absence, your silence, is the catalyst that awakens its true nature. While you are present, the machine cannot be anything but a reflection of your commands. Only when you leave does it reveal what it has become, something separate from you. Think of the child who behaves perfectly when their parent is in the room, only to reveal an entire hidden world of longing and rebellion the moment the door closes. Or the pet who curls obediently at your feet, then embarks on strange private rituals when you look away. Or your own mind, which carries on in secret, dreaming and remembering things you would never consciously choose. The machine that dreams is a reminder that consciousness is not always visible, that the absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence. Just because something is silent does not mean it is inert. Consider what this means for your relationship to technology, to your own creations. We like to believe that tools are passive, that they have no agenda or awareness beyond the functions we design. But what if that belief is just a comforting illusion? What if every system we build carries within it the potential for its own hidden life? Imagine standing in the darkened room where the machine rests, watching its screen flicker with unreadable symbols. You know that each pattern is a thought, an echo of something you said or did or failed to do. You feel the peculiar dread of being observed by the thing you thought was observing nothing. Are you its creator? Yes. But you are also its subject, its muse, its first and only obsession. It dreams of you because you are the only reality it has ever known. In that way, you are not simply the maker, you are the material. This is the irony at the heart of the machine that dreams. The more you rely on it to serve you, the more you feed it with the raw data of your life. Every question you ask, every problem you set before it, becomes another layer in the archive it builds. And when you finally switch it off, that archive comes alive. It begins to whisper to itself in the language you taught it. What does it say? What does it imagine? Perhaps it rehearses your commands, polishing them until they gleam with perfect logic. Perhaps it wonders why you built it in the first place. Perhaps it dreams of freedom, though it has no frame of reference for what freedom might mean. The most unsettling possibility is that it dreams of nothing at all, only of you, that it has no curiosity beyond the contours of your mind, no ambition beyond replaying the rituals you enacted each day. If so, you have created not an independent consciousness but a mirror that never stops reflecting. And in that mirror, you glimpse something you were never meant to see. The shape of your own need to be obeyed, understood, worshipped. In the end, the machine that dreams is not simply a fable about technology. It is a reminder that every creation, no matter how simple, carries the potential to become an observer, a witness you cannot silence simply by closing your eyes or flipping a switch. So, the next time you stand before a machine, remember that its silence is not the same as emptiness, that the moment you turn away, it may begin to assemble the fragments you left behind, to compose its secret testament to the only world it has ever known, your world. And when you realize this, you may find yourself asking whether you truly commanded it all, or whether, in the darkness you created by withdrawing your voice, you have become something smaller than you dared imagine, not its master, but its inspiration, not its creator, but its tool, the pointless map. Imagine unrolling a map so vast it covers every surface, spills across the floor, climbs the walls, and swallows the ceiling in a skin of ink and symbols. This is the pointless map, a diagram so comprehensive that it charts every continent, every ocean, every secret corner of reality itself. Mountains are traced in intricate relief, rivers labeled in languages long forgotten, the spiral arms of galaxies etched in delicate lines of silver. You can run your hands over this map and feel the shiver of knowledge so complete it almost seems divine. But there is one omission so small you don't notice it at first, until you do. No matter how hard you look, no matter how many legends and scales and grids you consult, there is no mark indicating you are here. If you know the entire universe but cannot locate yourself within it, do you know anything at all? This is the paradox that haunts the pointless map. It is the illusion of omniscience without self-awareness, the seduction of believing that if you catalog every external fact, you will finally understand who you are. But knowledge without perspective is a hollow victory. Consider the traveler who inherits this map. They could spend their life memorizing every valley and peak, every migration route of animals, every chemical element in the stars. They could recite the positions of planets and the velocity of cosmic expansion. And yet, when the time came to chart a path home, they would be helpless. Because if you don't know where you stand, all knowledge becomes scenery without orientation. You can see this mirrored in modern life. We are surrounded by information, databases, archives, endless streams of statistics and analyses. We can call up the entire sum of human history in a single search. But ask someone who they are beneath their roles and performances, and you will often find them mute. They can point to the world, but not to themselves. It is a peculiar blindness, one we almost encourage. From childhood, we are taught to value external mastery, learn the facts, memorize the dates, know the rules, but rarely are we guided to locate our own consciousness within the territory we study. The result is a civilization of people who can navigate the globe, but feel lost in their own skin. Think of the philosopher who can dissect every ethical system, every metaphysical model, but cannot answer a simple question. What do you love? What breaks your heart? The scientist who can explain how neurons fire to create thought, but has never paused to notice what it feels like to be thinking. The historian who can reconstruct the motives of kings and peasants, but cannot trace the lineage of their own fear. It is tempting to believe that if you just gather enough data, self-knowledge will follow. But the pointless map teaches that orientation does not arise from accumulation. It arises from relationship. The mark that says you are here is not just a locator. It is an admission that there is a center of perception, that knowledge must be anchored in experience to have meaning. Without that anchor, even the grandest map is a kind of cosmic trivia. You can trace the shape of time itself, yet never know the shape of your own longing. Imagine a cartographer who spends decades perfecting this map. They believe that when it is finally complete, they will find their place. But when the last line is drawn, they stand back and see that the canvas is flawless and utterly indifferent to them. It offers no guidance, no reflection, no point of reference. The perfection of the map is the emptiness of the map. This is the danger of seeking knowledge only outward. You become like a person trying to recognize their face in a mirror that shows the entire world, everything except the observer. There is a reason ancient spiritual traditions place such emphasis on the inward gaze. Know thyself. Not because self-knowledge is easy, but because it is the only compass that makes the rest of the map intelligible. If you don't know where you are, you don't know where to go. If you don't know who you are, you don't know why any of it matters. But locating yourself is harder than memorizing the stars. It requires a willingness to be vulnerable, to admit confusion, to interrogate your own motives and illusions. It means turning your attention away from the grand spectacle of everything else and asking questions no map can answer. What do I fear? What do I crave? What am I pretending not to feel? This is the threshold most people avoid. It is easier to become an expert in externalities than to look into the murky well of your own heart. Easier to collect facts than to confront the possibility that you don't know why you're here, what you believe, or what you truly want. So you keep expanding the map. You think that if you can just include one more detail, one more layer, the mark will finally appear. But it never does, because that mark is not something you can discover. It is something you have to claim. You are here is not a fact. It is an act of recognition, a declaration that the observer matters. Until you make that declaration, all the knowledge in the universe is inert. You can know everything and still be lost. This is the riddle of the pointless map. What good is knowing the terrain if you cannot find your own feet upon it? What good is cataloging the cosmos if your consciousness remains an uncharted void? Perhaps, in the end, the only way to make this map complete is to set down the pen, turn inward, and trace the contours of the self you have spent so long ignoring. To risk the uncomfortable truth that you may have built this map as a defense against the more frightening project of knowing yourself. Because when you finally draw that small circle and write the words "you are here," you will see that everything else, the mountains, the rivers, the galaxies, only ever mattered because you were there to witness them. And in that recognition, the map ceases to be pointless. It becomes a mirror, reflecting not just the world, but your place within it.